We now call the meeting to order. If you could please rise if you are able and pay attention to Councilmember Jensen for the invocation, to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Ladies and gentlemen, as many of you know, there have been large rashes of violence across our country in the past several weeks, and so I would ask each and every one of you to take a moment of silence in accordance with your own faith and in your own way ask for blessing on the folks that are no longer with us and their families and friends, and consider what you can do to help our country heal in this time of great unrest. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We now have a presentation. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, Utilities Director Bob Sample will make a presentation regarding our utilities collection systems. Bob?
Okay. Well, good evening, Madam Mayor, Council, City Manager. I'm really excited to come back with you with another episode of Utilities. It's a short episode, so within the 7 minutes, I hope. But I wanted to highlight our wastewater and stormwater collection system tonight and talk with you a little bit about that system. First of all, the wastewater and stormwater collection system resides under our Water Pollution Control Division with Sylvia Davis as the general manager, and Darren Coughlin is the manager over our collection system. So I'll kind of start with the assets. As you can see, the stormwater assets are listed in the blue. There's plenty. I'll highlight a few of them. We've got 400 miles of storm line, 179 miles of ditches, 140 miles of stream and channels, 22 miles of levee system along our river, and 9 storm pump stations. On the wastewater side, for our wastewater collection system, we have 717 miles of sanitary sewer line, almost 16,000 sanitary manholes, and then 47 sanitary pump stations. So just to briefly hit on the funding, all of our stormwater and wastewater assets are funded through user fees. And if you look at the stormwater rates, they're calculated, they're based off of an average impervious surface of residential property in Topeka. That average equates to one equivalent residential unit. We refer to that as an ERU. And the majority of our citizens pay $4.75 for their stormwater bill per month. I want to talk a little bit about the purpose of our stormwater utility. First is we're required to comply with the stormwater permit, and so we're directed by EPA through our permit to address water quality. And so what that means is this permit is very detailed and very lengthy, and we're required to implement and manage different programs that address water quality. A couple of those would be our construction and post-construction stormwater inspection program, as well as our illicit discharge program. So also, along with complying with that permit, we also maintain the stormwater conveyance system so that we can minimize localized flooding in our streets, and so that our citizens can travel throughout Topeka, even during a rain event. We also maintain and improve the levee system, that 22 miles of levee system along the Kansas River, and that protects us from major flood events. That protects homes, businesses. It also protects the wastewater treatment plants along with the water plants, which also is a benefit to all of us. Our wastewater rates fund all of our wastewater collection system. We are required to comply with a wastewater permit, and that wastewater permit requires us to minimize our sanitary sewer overflows and our combined sewer overflows. I will say that the stormwater system and the wastewater system are separate, with one exception. We do have about 10% of our system that is combined, and what that means is that 10% of that system conveys stormwater and wastewater. That's not a problem for us because that small portion of our system is large enough that it can handle a large rain event. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the functions of the collection system. Obviously, one of the functions is to maintain our storm and sanitary lines. So I thought I'd take you back in time a little bit to when I first started with the city of Topeka. And I hope you find this interesting. Here's some of the tools we used to clean a sewer line. If you look at the picture on the left and you see those spools, you see those rods wrapped around those spools, those are called hand rods. And that's exactly what you did with them. You would take these hand rods, you would attach an auger similar to the one you see on the picture on the right. You would enter the manhole, and then you would start inserting those rods and that auger up into the sewer until you reached the blockage, and then you would start turning those rods by hand with a bar that was specially made. So it was all manual. Once you've anchored that auger into the debris, pulled it back, and then you cleaned the auger off and removed the debris with a bucket and a rope. So a little bit step up in technology I've been able to see over the years, and that's that light blue equipment that you see in both pictures. That's called a power rodder. So we went from manually turning those power rods to using this power rodder that actually turned the rods for us. So enough of the old times and try to get us into the new times and how we maintain our storm and sanitary lines. So what you're looking at is a picture of a very high-tech sewer cleaning machine. This piece of equipment has the ability to clean a sewer main using high-pressure water. But not only that, then it also has the ability to vacuum out that manhole after it's been cleaned. And so notice the blue hose at the front of that spool in the front of that truck. That's actually the water line. That's off the water hose. And the picture on the left, you can see our staff preparing to vacuum out a manhole, a sewer manhole. We also use this piece of equipment to clean out our sanitary pump stations, as you can see on the picture on the right. And so I said that this piece of equipment can clean a sewer using high-pressure water. So on the picture on the left, you're looking into a manhole. We actually attach a nozzle, what we call a jet nozzle, onto that blue hose. And the holes in that nozzle are pointing backwards towards that hose. And so that truck then pressurizes that hose, and as you can see, that water is pushing backward very fast. So that then propels that nozzle and that hose through the sewer and cleans the walls of that sewer. So if you're looking at that picture on the left, that hose is moving from right to left. And as I said earlier, we have the ability to vacuum up debris out of a manhole, and the picture on the right is one of those vehicles that's offloading into a special station that was built at the Oakland Wastewater Treatment Plant. It filters out large objects and then allows the liquid to move on into the wastewater treatment plant for further treatment. Another function of collection system is we repair and replace infrastructure. As you can see by the picture on the left, our staff uses heavy equipment to clean out blockages in streams. Picture on the right shows that we also do line repair, and I believe that the operator there is fixing a force main, a wastewater force main from a pump station. We also operate and maintain the entire levee system. The picture on the left, we have 87 relief wells all along the levee, and they're there for a purpose, and that is to relieve pressure from the river when the river level gets real high. They need to be maintained, and our staff, collection system staff, maintains all of those relief wells. Picture on the right is a gate structure. We have 72 gate structures along the river also. And under normal conditions in the river, when the river's low, drainage areas will drain through these structures into the river. When the river comes up, then that tends to cause the water to back up into those drainage areas. So we're able to close those gates and then use the stormwater pump station to pump over the levee. Okay, and last but not least is our inspection and verification unit. So we also refer to that as our CCTV, or our closed circuit televising unit. So if you look at the picture on the left, you'll see an operator there sitting in a chair, and it looks like he's got a joystick in his hand, or a game controller, and he actually does. But please look up at the screen. He's not playing Nintendo. He's actually sitting in the back of a large step van, and he's controlling a camera similar to the one that you see on the right side, the right picture. So he can move that camera forward, he can move it backward, he can pan that camera around to look at the outside of the, or the inside of the sewer walls. And this is all videoed and kept for record. We use this for accepting new storm sewer and wastewater sewers. We use it for control to make sure that our line cleaning program is doing what it's supposed to. But we also take that video and review it, and we prioritize the condition of our assets for our CIP projects. So some of the things that we find using that CCTV, and the picture on the left, this is pretty common. You'll find root intrusion. That's pretty bad. Over half the sewer main is blocked. And the picture on the right then is grease that's caked to the side of that sewer. Now, obviously, as soon as we find something like this, we call our sewer cleaning machine to come in, and it can easily take care of these issues. So with that, that kind of ends my presentation. I would like to say that our collection system staff, it consists of 30 people. Unless they're new, they've all been cross-trained to work on storm sewers, wastewater sewers, or the levee system. And if they're new, then they soon will be able to do that as soon as they get cross-trained. Fits in really nice with our competency-based pay plan. And that kind of ends my episode of collection system.
Bob, thank you so much for this report. I think that a lot of our citizens take a look at what we do when we sit here, and these are the type of things that make a community good, when you don't have backups of these kind, because we're doing good care of this, and people don't think about it, but they're extremely important to us. Thank you for the education, not only for the constituents, but also for all of us. Are there any comments or questions from the body? Seeing none, thank you so much for your time, Bob. We now proceed with the roll call.
Mayor De La Isla.
Here.
Council members Hiller.
Here.
Clear. Here. Ortiz. Here. Emerson.
Here.
Padilla.
Here.
Jensen.
Present.
Mays.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
And Lesser.
Here.
We now move on to appointments, if the clerk would read.
A is a board appointment recommending the reappointment of Ariane Messina to the Topeka Planning Commission for a term ending September 30, 2022. B is a board appointment recommending the reappointment of Kathy Leonhardt to the Shawnee County Juvenile Corrections Advisory Board for an unexpired term ending July 31, 2022.
We have heard the appointments. What is the pleasure of the body? Councilman Jensen.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion by Councilman Jensen, a second by Councilman Padilla. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, we proceed by voting. The mayor does not vote.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voted yes, the motion passes. We have here with us in attendance Ms. Leonhardt and Ms. Messina. If you could please rise so we could recognize you. Thank you so much for your service to our community. We now move on to the consent agenda, if the clerk would read.
A is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller approving a special event known as the Tap That Topeka and rescinding conflicting portions of resolution number 9079. B is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller approving a special event known as the Tap That After Party. C is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller granting the Celtic Fox an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at sea concerning noise prohibitions. D is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller approving a special event known as Topeka. E are minutes of the regular meeting of July 23, 2019, and there are no applications.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion for approval by Councilmember Lessman. We have a second by Councilman Emerson. Any comments or questions with regards to the consent agenda? Did you raise your hand, Councilman? Yes, he did, but seeing no comments or questions, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to the action items. Action item 5A, if the clerk would read.
A is acceptance of the land dedications in the final plat for Horseshoe Bend subdivision number 5, which is located between Southwest Topeka Boulevard, Southeast 45th Street, and the Kansas Turnpike, all being within the City of Topeka, Shawnee County, Kansas.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, Director Bill Finder will provide you information on this agenda item. Bill?
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Good evening, governing body. Your Honor. Yes, tonight we have before you a final plat that was approved by the Planning Commission for your acceptance for the dedication of right-of-way and easements. It is located, this is Horseshoe Bend subdivision number 5. It is located at Southeast 45th and Truman. Actually dates back to 2000 when Horseshoe Bend and actually Grand Oaks was the original name. Both of these subdivisions have grown over time. There are 7 phases. This is the 5th phase. There's about 200 or so lots in there right now. This will approve another 31 for development, and you'll have another 60 left for complete build-out of the last 2 phases. So the issues that we addressed with the plats were from the citizens' comments as well as staff review. 3 things. One was connection to the Landon Trail. There was this subdivision backs up to the on the west side to the Landon Trail. So having a pedestrian access easement that would connect to that trail and increase their value to the property and the homes there was recommended. The county has agreed to maintain that connection, so that was something that we did through the plat process. The second thing is this is the first phase for this Horseshoe and Grand Oaks that will connect the 2. Before, both of those have kind of been dead ends almost, so now you have full street connection, which is good for emergency access and, again, neighborhood traffic diffusion. And then lastly, we have stormwater. Stormwater was not required, at least in the way it is now, back in 2000. So 6 lots were dedicated for stormwater detention, and that has been accepted by the city. The developer will own those lots and maintain them under an operating plan approved by the city. So those were the main 3 issues that the plat addresses. As again, this was already approved, so I'll stand for any questions pending your motion.
Do we have any questions with regards to this item for Mr. Fiander? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the body? We have a motion for approval by Councilman Padilla, a second by Councilmember Jensen. If there's no further discussion, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item B, if the clerk would read.
B is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout authorizing and providing for the issuance of $37,090,000 aggregate principal amount of general obligation refunding and improvement bonds, Series 2019A, and $1,440,000 aggregate principal amount of general obligation bonds, Series 2019B zoo projects of the City of Topeka, Kansas, providing for the levy and collection of an annual tax for the purpose of paying the principal of and interest on said bonds as they become due, authorizing certain other documents and actions in connection therewith, and making certain covenants with respect thereto.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Governing body, today we conducted sale of bonds and various types. I'm going to invite Finance and Administrative Services Director Jessica Lamondola forward, and she will go through the sale and what the final determination was. I'm going to have her go ahead and discuss each of the sales that were conducted, rather than having her get up and down. We'll go through, and then you will consider each one of them on their own, but have her present her report related to each of the sales that occurred. So, Jessica?
Good evening. I'm not sure how many deals I've gone through from the issuer side, but every morning I wake up and I'm always just a little bit nervous because you just don't know what the market's going to do. But today was a good day for the City of Topeka. We had a lot of interest. We were a little concerned, or I was just a little interested, I guess, rather than concerned going into today. Last week there was a lot of activity in the market. They took it down quite well, but going into the next week, you just don't know what appetite there's out there. But we were well received. So, you have 3 agenda items before you. The ordinance, which authorizes the issuance of general obligation bonds of about $35.9 million, and then another $1.4 million of GEO bonds for zoo projects. You have a resolution for GEO bonds for 2019 A and B series, and then a resolution for temporary notes for 2019 and A and B series. The B series is taxable. Tonight in attendance for more in-depth questions, we have our financial advisors from Capital Markets, Jeff White and Caitlin Dwyer, and then we also have bond counsel if there's any additional questions. So outside of that, the bids were received this morning. We completed a competitive bid process, competitive sale. You should have all the available information in front of you. But before we jump into the deal specifics, this deal was rated by Standard & Poor's. We have a AA rating with a stable outlook, so that's the 3rd highest rating. And for an issuer of our size and our socioeconomic pattern, it's an excellent rating by any standard, but I think we should be particularly proud of that rating. The rating highlights our adequate economy. In talking to the analyst, I think we have an above adequate economy. They are very wed to specific stats and measures, but in speaking to them, we were able to highlight all of the growth that we're seeing in the community and what that's doing for expectations for revenue, just for overall livability and what we see in the horizon. So I think that we also were well received from the analyst perspective. They also highlighted, again, very strong management, our strong budgetary performance. We set a budget and we respond pretty closely to it. We have a lot of budget flexibility, and going into what could be more difficult times, I think that's obviously going to be one of our strengths. We have very strong liquidity. That's a credit to this board being committed to the fund balance reserve and maintaining that. So congratulations on that. We have an adequate debt profile. We have along with our contingent liability profile, and overall just a strong institutional framework, and that's reflective of the state of Kansas, but also our commitment to our overall policies. They highlighted our transparency. They visited the website and were able to find almost all the information that they needed for their review, and I think that's pretty unique, especially for an issue of our size. So I think it's one of those moments where you kind of pat yourself on the back and, just look what you can do better, but recognize that we've come a long way, and it's, the outside market is recognizing that. Obviously, the downside potential is if our financial position were to weaken or our operations were to change. But I think, going into our current year, we're looking quite good. So we're fixing the budget where it needs to be fixed, but we're doing well for the year. So turning now to the actual sale, because I know everybody's waiting. The 2019 A notes, the $38.3 million, we received 5 bids with the winning bidder at $1.1352. Our taxable notes, the 2019, the winner on that was Bank of America Merrill Lynch. The 2019 B taxable notes of $3.65 million was taken down by Jeffries at 2.0395. Our general obligation bonds of approximately 37.1 million. We had 7 bids, and I think, again, that's just a reflection of the market coming in strong. So, it makes the overall deal just more competitive. That was taken down by Robert Baird at 1.8941. And then our zoo project, which is a slightly different at 1.44 million. We had 2 bids. This was the one that I think we were most nervous about just because it's a smaller par value. It may not be as attractive to the bigger names. But it was taken down by Hutchison, Shockey, and Early at 2.2952%. And I think overall we beat our results from last year. So I think it was a good day. Open for questions, concerns. Otherwise, I'll pass it on for your guys' vote.
Questions or comments for Ms. Lamondola?
All right.
Seeing none. At this point in time, we have had, the next few votes are going to be related to this. So we would start with item B, which is the first one that the clerk read. If there's no questions for staff, what is the pleasure of the body? We have a motion for approval by Councilmember Emerson, a second by Councilman Jensen. Comments or questions on item B? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item C, related to the bonds as well.
C is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout, prescribing the form and details and authorizing and directing the sale and delivery of $37,090,000 of aggregate principal amount of general obligation refunding and improvement bonds, Series 2019A, and $1,444,000 of aggregate principal amount of general obligation bonds, Series 2019B zoo projects of the City of Topeka, Kansas, previously authorized by the ordinance of the issuer, making certain covenants and agreements to provide for the payment and security thereof, and authorizing certain other documents and actions connected therewith.
City Manager?
Mayor, I don't have anything additional to add related to this.
Okay. Comments or questions from the body? What is the pleasure of the body? Deputy Mayor?
Move to approve.
We have a motion by the Deputy Mayor, and we have a second by Councilmember Jensen. Comments or questions on this issue? Yes, Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. City Manager, what are the projects in the neighborhood and the 5th Street traffic way projects, one public safety project, one quality of life project, one facilities project, and one special assessment project?
let's see.
What are those?
It's not listed in the back of that one. It's not listed in the back of your packet. They were listed in the final copy of what was produced today. Does anybody have a final copy? Right here.
Yeah, there's one more.
Oh, there it is. So
Ms.
item
Lamondola?
5C relates to, it's the third page of the packet, relates to improvements on 49th Street and Winger, engines 1 and 11, city infill sidewalks, neighborhood infrastructure, traffic signal replacement, traffic safety project, complete streets, citywide infrastructure, $3 million project on Huntoon, I-470 Avonia Place, some storm drainage, 2 million gallon elevated tank. There's a long list of additional utility projects that are there. Water main replacement, Soldier Township improvements, water treatment plant rehab, citywide water meter replacement, water treatment modifications, Montero Water Tower, solid handling phase 2 of the wastewater, solid handling phase 2 biogas, East Side IS relief, Wanamaker force main rehab, Ash Street force main replacement, Shunga Pump Station rehab, Oakland aerator and mixing replacement, Grant Jefferson Pump Station, ultraviolet expansion for Oakland, sanitary sewer interceptor rehab, small wastewater rehab, 2019 wastewater replacement program, 2019 water pollution control facility rehab program, and 2020 WPC SCADA system upgrade.
Thank you.
Additional comments or questions on this item? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
I forgot I was at the front. 'Cause the final one.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item D. If the clerk would read.
D is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout authorizing and directing the issuance, sale, and delivery of $38,305,000 in the aggregate principal amount of general obligation temporary renewal and improvement notes, Series 2019A, and $3,650,000 in the aggregate principal amount of taxable general obligation temporary renewal notes, Series 2019B, of the City of Topeka, Kansas, providing for the levy and collection of an annual tax if necessary for the purpose of paying the principal of and interest on said notes as they become due, making certain covenants and agreements to provide for the payment and security thereof, and authorizing certain other documents and actions connected therewith.
City Manager.
Nothing further to add, Mayor.
This again is another one of the items discussed by Ms. Lamondola. At this time, do we have any questions for Ms. Lamondola or City Manager? And if there is none, what is the pleasure of the body? Councilman Jensen moves for approval. We have a second by Councilmember Cohen. Additional comments or questions before we proceed with voting? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
Mr. Jensen? We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item E, if the clerk would read.
E is a public hearing to obtain citizen input on the City of Topeka's draft fiscal year 2020 Consolidated Action Plan.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight is the conducting of the hearing on the Consolidated Action Plan. Neighborhood Relations Director Sasha Hahn went through the details of that at our last meeting to present the very detailed description of how we plan to utilize these funds. So unless there are any questions, Director Hahn is here and can answer them if there are.
If there's no questions from the council at this time, this is a public hearing type of item. We do have one individual who has previously signed up to speak for this item, but at this point in time, we will open the public hearing, and I will invite Mr. Clark Trammell to come forward and make his remarks.
I'll be brief. Good evening. I think this is well presented. I think it's important that these dollars be spent judiciously the way we have outlined them. I believe the NIA funding comes under this item. Is that correct? And the only comment I really wanted to make is, as I move through the community and talk with NIAs and their leadership as part of my activism in the community, there is a shortage of funding to effectively support these assets in the community, and I would ask you all to be sensitive to that and do what you can to assist staff to give the appropriate funding to our NIAs, which are your extended voice in and out of the community and an incredibly valuable asset to our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. City Manager.
Yes, the NIA support is $65,000 that is covered in the Con Action Plan. That's the direct support.
Thank you for your clarification. At this point in time, there are no other individuals who previously signed up to speak to this item. However, if you would like to speak, this is your time to do so. If you would like to speak to this item, please feel free to step forward. And finally, if you are interested in speaking to the Consolidated Action Plan, please step up. Seeing nobody stepping up at this point in time, we are closing the public hearing, and if the council has any questions or discussions on this item, this is our time to have our discussion. Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had one, and I wanted to thank staff. I've asked some questions in this body and then outside about the inmate crews, and everybody is really supportive of the inmate crews, as am I. But it was hard to chase the money the way it was presented. I had an observation and a question. The observation is that one of the reasons I had the questions is that when we started using the inmate crews, they were doing brick streets, brick sidewalks. You saw them often working on housing projects or in overall infrastructure projects. And what we're seeing, as far as I know, is the men's crews now that are doing the big property cleanups and so on, and the mowing and so on. So I was asking because I miss seeing that. And I did look at the charts that were in there. We are apparently funding 3 crews, so a total of $156,000 through CDBG money. And those are the ones that are supposed to be working on housing. And then there's a 4th one that's funded through a couple of departments that was the brick streets one. I haven't seen them building sidewalks, working on housing and so on. When I looked at the hours, we've either been running shorter crews, they're supposed to be 4 or 5 person crews, but they either are not working as often as the other crews, or the crews are running short. And so I just wanted to encourage that we do some internal audit on that and optimize the use of those crews if there are ways that we can use them more. If the issue is us providing projects, and if the issue is efficiency, that we work on that as well. The other question I had is we have apparently funding from KDOT that is paying for the supervision that's spread between 2 crews. And my question is KDOT expecting that we are using those crews to do the right-of-ways, or?
Sasha can come forward, but I know that from the reports that I get, we are using them regularly on some of those right-of-ways, mainly in the interstate right-of-ways, if I remember correctly. Sasha, you can
That's correct.
explain more detail?
KDOT provides us 64.8 annually. That is to administer the Highway Action Team A and B, and those crews pick up litter and do light maintenance of those right-of-way areas on the interstate systems around Topeka.
Do they mow? if I may ask?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
We don't have the large equipment that it would be required to do that mowing, and KDOT has traditionally always taken care of that.
Good. I just, as a council person, and I'm not alone, I think, when the state's right-of-ways haven't been mowed, guess who gets the call? And I've always sent them in and thought that KDOT was responsible, so I just wanted to clarify if somehow I didn't realize what was up. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Additional comments or questions on this topic? Seeing none, what is the pleasure of the body? Councilwoman Hiller.
Move to approve.
We have a motion for approval. We have a second by Councilman Burkowen. Any comments or questions to follow? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item F, if the clerk would read.
F is a public hearing to obtain public input and answer questions and objections from taxpayers regarding the proposed 2020 City of Topeka operating budget and an appropriation ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trapp approving and adopting the operating budget for calendar year 2020 and appropriating the amounts for the purpose set forth therein.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Governing body. Last meeting, we went through the discussion regarding potential amendments for this budget and also talked about some of the work that we've been doing to try and improve our provision of service. And so from that, I've been looking at things, and I don't feel that I have any additional comments that I'll make tonight, but I would ask that Director of Administrative and Financial Services, Jessica Lamondola, come forward. She has a few comments tonight. So, Jessica, will she step out? Oh,
She is
can step
outside.
out. She got me. Can you get Jessica, please? Is she being interviewed? I can't see everyone in the audience. As I was saying, I'd like to ask Jessica Lamondola to please come forward and make some comments regarding the budget and the process. Thank you,
In all
Jessica.
fairness, she was talking to our bond counsel, so.
We were going over the numbers, and I forgot to highlight that our refunding issue, I think the percentage was like over 10%. We saved close to $2 million. So again, it was a really good day in the market, so we were going over those numbers again. Sorry for the delay, but for the budget, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Nick and his team,
Yeah.
Alyssa, Karuva, both joining us full-time, almost mid-budget. Karuva's not here tonight, but both essential to the process. You know, Nick has been an excellent leader in the budget process, and we've had a lot of partnership with all of our departments, with the council. You know, we just wanted to take that opportunity to highlight their hard work. So that's all.
Thank you very much. At this point in time, we do have a public hearing again for this item, but before we walk into the public hearing, does the council have any questions for city manager? Seeing none, at this point in time, we are going to open up our public hearing. We do have 3 individuals signed up to speak, so we're going to call on them first. The first one signed up to speak in the public hearing is Mr. Dick Ketterman.
Council members, how are you all today? I spoke to you, I think it was about 2 or 3 meetings ago concerning the bicycle routes. And the reason I'm back up here again today, and my mind hasn't changed, I think it's something that probably we should not, at this point, fund. And I've got several reasons. But the primary thing is I'm not against the bike program. I'm athletically and physically able to do things. I think it's a great activity. But at this point, when it starts to cause a funding problem for the city, and as minor as that may seem, it is a problem. Now, I've ran actually 3 different businesses that were non-for-profit. And probably the most difficult one was running a private athletic club that had a softball field that came with the club, which I didn't want, but the general population down in Kansas City, Kansas wanted to set up leagues there. I went out and beat the bushes and got sponsors, and by the time I was through, the entire outfield wall was nothing but huge signs. So for organizations like the bike, like the bicycling and other organizations like that, maybe they can get a lot of that funding from just going out and doing exactly what you have to do for something like that. And that is not necessarily asking for help, but going out and seeing what they can do on their own. And this one, to me, would be a very easy one because the city of Topeka is very up on trying to stay sports-wise. Plus, I don't believe that the city, I won't ride I've got 2 bikes, a mountain bike and a touring bike, and I will not ride them on the streets in this town. It's not safe. These streets weren't made, at least most of them weren't made for cars and bicycles together. We have a great bike system and everything, and that's where I do mine. Okay, and that was the main reason I was here tonight. If I could slip in a couple things while I still have a couple of minutes going. I wanted to thank 3 people while I'm up here. One of the things I was here with a slight complaint the last time was about some work that hadn't been done in my yard. And before I got out of the building that night, Bob Sample had caught me outside and spoke to me about it. The problem, he sent out the next day Jason DeWitt, and then, of course, my council person, Sandra Clear, I assume had something to do with both of them speaking to me. So I compliment you. We all worked out a great compromise because I've been able to put it off until the fall when it should have been, when it should be done anyway. So that's one of the reasons I'm up here. You guys usually hear complaints. I'm up here to pay you all a compliment.
Thank you very much.
So I think that was all. Oh, one other thing. I'd like to issue everybody here a challenge. I'm going to do this Memphis?
You have 1 minute.
Okay. I'm going to do this at the commission meeting Thursday. I'm going to go out and buy a case of green beans and corn. I'm just going to challenge everybody in this room here at the council and everybody sitting behind us to do the same thing and/or use some money and take it over to the rescue mission. We have got to have that. That's one function in the city that, just imagine if everybody that's listening here, what it would be like if we didn't have that. So that was all I wanted to say tonight.
Thank you. Second person signed up to speak is Mr. Joseph Ledbetter.
Good evening, governing body. I've spoken on various items concerning the budget already, so that's a record. I've sent you some emails. One reorganization I would propose, I sent that to you to get some greater efficiencies in some of what we're doing as a city. I continue to believe we need to privatize as much as possible our road repairs. I think I was watching these Vance brothers for just a couple minutes the other day repairing a large stretch of road, and they just seem to know what they're doing. They're private contractors. I know that Beddits does great work. I've watched some of their crews as I've driven across town. It just amazes me the difference. It just seems like the finished product is much better. It holds up much better, and than when we've had year after year of the same crews doing the same patch, and they'll come apart within a few days or a few weeks. And I don't like wasting money. I think this tax money needs to be very productively spent, and we need good results. I do want to thank Nick. He got me some very good data very quickly. I like that in finance. When they do that, it means they know exactly what they're doing in their budgets, or they wouldn't be able to answer those questions in a timely fashion. One of the questions I asked was about animal control, how many FTEs they've got. I've got to watch my timer. I will tell you that this year, with the constant complaining I'm hearing from some of the NIA people, and then seeing police officers attacked by whether it's pit bulls or other vicious dogs, I think we need more animal control people. I don't think 6 is enough. I did not talk to the police chief about this, but I think adding another position is needed. If we're not going to legislate controls on these animals, we're going to have to enforce with animal control people dealing with dogs at large, especially the vicious ones. I know one resident of Highcrest has moved out of there because she's terrified of the dogs breaking loose and running even up to her porch. So she recently moved out of there. And I think that problem is more than just in Highcrest. So I would ask you to consider adding another FTE if the police chief would allow that. I think we need more animal control than what we've got. One of the items I looked at was the ending balances. And I think on your general, I know it's not set yet, but I personally think 23% is too much. I don't see why you can't lower that to 20% and give the rest of it back to the taxpayers. 15% is a good standard nationwide. They taught that at KU years ago. It's still being taught today in their MPA programs. I just think 23% is too high. I did ask what is the ending reserves on the water department budget, and my concerns with the water department is we've had so many breaks from poorly designed, poorly, I don't know how to describe it. I cannot describe an engineer that would actually put corrosive, would put iron pipe into corrosive ground for years. And I know that was done. I gave you some of those numbers earlier. I think we've got to start replacing lots of those pipes instead of just fixing ad hoc we need to take whole blocks and just replace it. Those are my comments. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ledbetter. The next person signed up to speak is Mr. Clark Trammell.
Good evening again. This is a public hearing, and I'm saying this for those here and who are watching, that it's important for the community to engage in this conversation. You all have asked, and it's hard to complain and be negative if you're not willing to get out here and have a dialogue with you all. So I would tell the community it's charge upon you to be engaged in this conversation, and you have the right to be here just like I do to make a comment. I would also say on behalf of your budget planning, I'd like to reiterate that next year is not going to be an easy year to budget, and you've all made that very clear. And I want the community to hear it from somebody besides you all, that my background is such in business and banking that I understand exactly what you said, and it's going to be a very challenging year to put a budget together, and I compliment you all and thank you for keeping the mill levy where it is. But the city doesn't run on good wishes and smiling faces. It runs on money. And you all have really stepped up to get us where we are, but I want the community to hear it from a citizen that next year it's going to be a different conversation and they need to be involved and engaged. I would also ask as you go along that the Housing Trust Fund, I think that's the name of it that was approved, needs funding by the community that needs to come out of the budget or someplace in meeting with Jump in that organization. And I know you all know that, so as you prepare to go forward, there is an item that will need to be addressed within the next 12, 24 months of where's the money going to come from, how are we going to do it, how's it going to be structured. And they're looking for that answer. But beyond that, when you look at the CIP, the CAP, and the budget, the numbers are big all over the place. We have ALS equipment we need in the fire engines and in the program for the fire department. Advanced Life Support System is what ALS stands for. So there's a lot of little nuances out there that the public may not be aware of that interact in and out of the budget. Just like the comment I made about the NIAs. $65,000 sounds like a big number, but when you divide that between 20 or 30 NIAs and you get down to $2,000 or $3,000 a year for a budget to do mailings and ink, et cetera, it's probably thin. But it is what it is. So we have challenges that are going to hit us as the budget goes forward in the coming years. I applaud you. I thank you for your commitment, your focus, and the opportunity to make these comments. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Trammell. At this point in time, it is open for anybody in the audience, even if you have not signed up, to make any public remarks. Again, it is open for anybody in the public to make any remarks. Sir, please, if you would like to join us. Yes, sir, if you want to make remarks regarding the budget, this is your time to...
Budget?
Yes, sir.
Oh, it's not just public comment.
No, it's just a public hearing for the budget. Seeing nobody else standing up to speak on the budget item, this public hearing is closed, and at this point in time, I will look around my colleagues to see if there's any comments or questions with regards to this item. Councilman Jensen.
I just want to again commend the city staff for putting the numbers together in such a way this year that we can deliver a flat budget to our community. That's quite a feat in this day and age when demand for services is soaring. So again, thank you for all your incredible effort in doing so.
What is the pleasure of the body?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion for approval by Councilmember Jensen. We have a second by Councilmember Padilla. Are there comments or questions from the body? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to the non-action items.
A is discussion of proposed amendments to Division 2, Title 18 of the Municipal Code regarding a comprehensive update of the Topeka Sign Code.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Governing body, we've been conducting meetings with you regarding the update that we're proposing for the sign code. Tonight, we'll make a public presentation regarding the update to the sign code to expose it to the public and be, as a group, able to answer questions for you that you may have had as you've contemplated the document that we provided. It's a very large update, but it also is one that has been well overdue, and I'm excited that we're able to present it to you tonight. So I'll ask Director Finder to go through and make the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Good evening again, everybody. I too am pleased to present this comprehensive update to the city's sign code as being recommended from the Planning Commission and staff. This is actually our third and final installment of what we're calling a visual code update. We have brought to you landscape regulations and new commercial building design standards. We started this a few years ago to really improve the community's physical appearance. So this represents that last phase. So tonight, just do a little discussion. We are hoping that you have time to digest all of this and hopefully come back to you next month for future consideration for action. I'm also going to share presentation duties tonight with my current planning manager, Mike Hall. Some of you can see him. He's hidden back here. He will walk through the recommendations in the new code with you tonight. He is the leader of this project, an outstanding project manager. Could not have gotten here without Mike. We also have two of our sign code committee members in the audience tonight. Cindy Prowett and Virginia Baumgartner from Luminous Neon are here with support. They worked with us through the entire process. I don't know if they've been with us all 22 months, but they have definitely hung in there. Okay, so what are the issues that we're trying to address? There are two issues, really, when you boil it down. One is our code is greatly outdated. It just has not kept pace with best practices with other cities. It is highly permissive. We have a code that is also out of date with Supreme Court decisions that mandates content neutrality. What that really means is if you read the sign, to regulate it, that's unconstitutional. So really you can only regulate things like time, the place, the location, the manner, the size, and the height. The second issue that we're dealing with are aesthetics. We've learned recently from some community surveys, notably in Momentum 2022, that aesthetics drives community pride, community attachment, which also leads to local spending and investment within this community. We did not score very well in that survey for our visual and physical appearance. A very low 15% thought we were above average in appearance. Likewise, we had a survey done for the sign code, which that precipitated this update. A whopping 96% thought that signs were very important or somewhat important to the visual quality of our community. So we do a good job with our sign code. We do a good job then with community attachment and pride, which leads to more spending and investment locally. So very tied together. Our visual appeal survey kicked us off in early of 2018 for the process. An unbelievable response we had. Almost 1,000 respondents. That's unheard of with 400 almost written comments. We fed those results to our sign code committee, made up mostly of sign industry professionals, legal experts who have written codes throughout the nation, benchmarked other cities. That led to a public review of those recommendations earlier this year and concluded we had at least 10 meetings at the Planning Commission, concluded with a public hearing for unanimous approval in May of this year. Before I bring Mike up, I wanted to show you a couple images that really led to a lot of the recommendations that he is going to walk you through. These all come from the community, and when they took the survey, really interesting findings that I'll show you. The first image here, the first slide, shows you on the right the image that was supposed to be rated. It's a fairly new sign. It's not overly big, but you'll see it's on 2 poles. The charts, basically if you have a higher, the green and the blue bars are on the left are disapproval. The lighter blue and the red bars on the right are more approval. So this had more disapproval than approval. When you take the same company, different sign package, it's actually a bigger sign, but it's not on poles, it's a monument style. The approval ratings doubled in this survey. When you look at another comparison of signs that we have in the community, these are larger shopping center signs. This is a pretty tall one on 2 poles, and not overly big in sign area, but certainly about a 50-foot tall sign. Did not receive very good approval ratings. When you just then switch to a different type of shopping center sign across the street, you triple the approval ratings for that type of sign. So what the public was telling us here from these images and their ratings was really they put a lot more value, not necessarily on, they put more value on shorter signs, more monument signs, not pole signs, and materials too. Materials, as you can see in this image here, represented with the brick foundation. So those types of things, more proportionate signs as well, not as many signs on a property. So those are the sort of things that, and I'll bring Mike up here, that led to a lot of our recommendations with the sign committee and ultimately the planning commissions. So here's a sign to let you know that signs are changing. So Mike, you want to walk them through? Yes. Okay.
Brendan, was that your idea?
Yeah, clicking right here.
Okay, got it. Hello. So, recommendations. The big recommendations is that the size and number of signs will be proportional to the size of the building and the property, and it would not be a one-size-fits-all type of code. Monument signs would be phased in. Pole signs would be phased out with a few exceptions. Compared to the current code, there'd be more relaxed standards for office and institutional uses, more restrictive standards for some of the commercial and industrial districts. The proposed code will phase out abandoned signs and portable message center signs in 1 to 2 years. And there will be a 20-year grandfather period for existing freestanding signs. So an example of wall sign standards, this applies to our most common commercial and industrial districts. Currently, the standard is any sign is allowed is up to 300 square feet, and there's no limit on the quantity of signs. As proposed, the size and number allowed will be based on the building facade size. It'll be a function of the width of the building facade. Under no circumstance will any individual sign be allowed to exceed 250 square feet, with some exceptions based on the distance from the street. Freestanding signs, this applies to office and institutional districts. Currently, there's no limit on the number of signs per lot. However, each sign is limited to a height of 5 feet and a maximum of 40 square feet, and is required to be a monument type of sign. As proposed, there would be limits on the quantity of signs allowed per lot. It'd be 1 per street frontage, or 1 for every 500 linear feet of street frontage for larger sites. There's a difference between the standards that apply to local and collector streets and those that apply to arterial streets. Sign size allowed is a function of the street frontage, and for local and collector streets could not exceed a height of 7 feet, and for local, under no circumstances, a size of 50 square feet, and for collectors, under no circumstances a size of 60 square feet. Again, the sign would have to be a monument type of sign. For the arterial streets, it's also a function of, the size is also a function of the size of the property, the frontage specifically, maximum height of 10 feet, maximum area of 70 square feet. Freestanding signs in our most common commercial districts, our most common commercial and industrial districts. Currently, pole signs are allowed. Each sign is allowed to a height of 55 feet and 300 square feet area per face. There's no limit on the number or the quantity of signs per site. As proposed, there would be a limit of 1 sign per street frontage or 1 per 500 linear feet of street frontage. The allowed sign size is a function of the street frontage, but in no circumstances could it exceed 120 square feet. It'd be required to be a monument-style sign, maximum height of 25 feet. Exceptions. One exception would apply the distance to which the sign is set back from the street right-of-way. There would be an exception that is an incentive to reduce the number of signs to 1, allowing an area exception. Exceptions for historic signs. Exceptions for signs at highway interchanges where streets intersect and interchange with highways. And exceptions for shopping center signs, large shopping centers, and office complexes and institutional campuses. A sign that is currently legal but is rendered non-conforming by the adoption of new standards is considered a legal non-conforming sign. A sign like this would be allowed to exist for a period of up to 20 years, at which time, if it's a freestanding sign, it would have to come under full compliance. There is an option. Well, first of all, if a sign is refaced or there's a copy change, under most circumstances that would not require any compliance or partial compliance. If it's an alteration to the sign, to the cabinet or the height of the sign or the structure of the sign, it would have to comply. As an alternative to full compliance, it would be allowed to have partial compliance and be reduced by 1/3 in terms of height and area of the sign. Abandoned signs. An abandoned sign is any sign on a property for which the use to which it had applied has changed or the property containing the use has become vacant. This photo is of one type of abandoned sign. As you can see, the site that it pertains to has long been vacant. There's no building there. There's no improvements on the site that are still viable. Under the current code, that sign is not prohibited. It just is required to be maintained. And this particular sign would probably be required to be painted if it was cited for noncompliance. Under the proposed code, any non-conforming sign would be required to be removed immediately after the building is demolished. And there are standards and requirements that apply to other types of abandoned signs. New abandoned sign restrictions would not come into play for 1 year after the code is adopted or takes effect. Other types of signs. So temporary signs, the main purpose in looking at the temporary sign standards was to make sure they were content neutral and that signs were accommodated appropriately by time, place, and manner. As proposed, instead of having a vague time limit defined by event, there'd be a time limit defined by the number of days in a particular period and a maximum number of periods per year by zoning district. Also, the new sign code would accommodate feather flag signs and freestanding banners, which are not expressly accommodated in the current code. In the proposed code, there's a new category of signs called incidental signs. These are signs that are of durable construction but are secondary to the primary sign. This photo is an example of a type of incidental sign, which is common, a directional type of sign, and the new code accommodates these and provides for their use. Portable message center signs. Currently, the code requires an annual permit for this type of sign, but there's no limit on the number or time allowed. Those who took the visual appeal survey, 79% of those who took that survey rated this as very unappealing. As proposed, these would be phased out entirely after 24 months. They'd be a prohibited sign. In the meantime, they'd be treated as a temporary sign and restricted to commercial areas, churches, and schools. They'd be restricted to time, location, and number, and a permit would be required. The new format, in the new code, the dimensional standards would be provided in a user-friendly tabular format by zoning district. Each sign type would be on a single page, and there are notes attached to each table for exceptions. So that concludes our presentation, and we'll take any questions and comments.
Any questions or comments for the team? Councilmember Lesser.
Just a couple. First off, I reviewed the whole plan, and I thought it was very well done. So thank you for that. Couple quick questions, two actually. One is, give me a little bit of insight on how you came up with the 20 years on the grandfather period.
Sure, I'll take a shot. Councilman Lesser, that was a good discussion at the Planning Commission. You can see in the minutes there was some back and forth on that. 20 years is probably a standard in most cities you would see when they're going to a new sign code and they're going to create some non-conforming signs. It relates to the time, not time, but more the investment made in that sign by a company or an organization to get their investment out of that sign. So we called it amortization period, and it's exactly what it is. It depreciates over time, and 20 years is probably a reasonable time to expect the sign to depreciate in value enough that a new sign or an improved sign would be ready for that property. So, you know, I've seen some at 10 years, I've seen some at 30 years, so we're kind of in the middle there.
Fair enough, fair enough. The only other question I had was another question along the time arena. This one was on the portable message center signs. I would be supportive of giving them a year to get rid of those. Same question, 24, why 2 years?
Well, another good discussion at the Planning Commission. I think we started out 0 years and ended up at 2. There was some sentiment a little bit along the same lines. We heard from a the business owner who owns those signs, had just recently bought those from what was Boyle's, what was Owl's Nest, and bought those a couple years ago. And I think, again, getting their investment back out of that 2 years was sort of the grace period to allow them to do that. It was more an investment, getting your return out of that investment. And so, yes, a year was talked about. They settled on 2.
Thank you.
The other thing I'll add is that with the permit requirement and the restrictions that have been placed on them as temporary signs, they won't be utilized the way they typically are today. A sign that you would see put in a property and used year-round will not be allowed to be, and so even though it is a 2-year period, it will have a reduced availability to people that typically use them. So it will change the way we see them in our community immediately upon approval of this, along even during this 2-year period. So that was part of it too. With the restrictions, I think they looked at 2 years as being a reasonable period of time.
Thank you. They would fall under the same time restrictions as any temporary sign would, which is a 30-day time period, whereas now there is none. So,
Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple questions. On the abandoned signs, there happens to be some buildings that are vacant that still have that sign out there. Will that the example had an empty lot. Will that lot need to be empty before that sign's required to come down, or how does that gonna work?
Council Member Cohen, there's two ways, two applications, I guess. The one we showed you tonight, when there's, really, when the property is vacant and there's no building, and the sign is not conforming, i.e. it's a pole sign, then that would need to be removed. If it's been that way well, actually, in that case, if there is no building, it would need to be removed. We built in a one-year grace period for those types of signs. If there's a building on the property and it's just vacant, then the sign doesn't have to be removed. So that it just has to be covered, or the face of the sign would need to remove the business or organization name that no longer relates to that building. So that's the main difference.
Yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of the old Holiday Inn on 10th that's been vacant there. It's the
Yes, the red carpet.
something suites or something.
Yes,
or
the
something,
old
yeah.
red carpet inn
Yeah.
suites.
Yeah.
That's a good example of, that would end up staying. It would have to be, they'd have to take red carpet inn and suites off of the sign cover. But that is actually probably going to end up being conforming, because it's close enough to the highway intersection where it would be allowed to be that height and style.
Okay. Are we, Mayor, continue, are we going to get into the sign removal business if businesses aren't conforming? Are we going to go take them down?
We probably will not be, because if we follow, this is part of the zoning code. Zoning code enforcement really goes through the courts. So we send the violations, and by the way, the idea to have some grace period is to notify people ahead of time that, hey, the rule's changing, you have a year to do something. So if they don't, and we send them a violation notice, and they elect not to do anything about it, then it goes to district court. Well, ultimately, it would go through the court system. And if there's a judge's order to remove it, the city could be involved at that point, but we're not typically in the business of removing signs that aren't in the right-of-way, put it that way, yeah.
Okay. Were political signs covered in the Planning Commission thing?
They're not called political signs. We cannot call them political signs. We can't really mention any sign type that describes what the content of that sign is. So a political sign would be a temporary sign. And so you would follow the temporary sign regulations. And on that, of course, our regulations don't apply currently under state law. So we wouldn't apply the new temporary sign regulations to what would be called a political sign yet because of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
What could you remind me, what are the limitations of the temporary sign that the political sign would fall under that category?
What is being proposed? So the current state law for political signs are, you have 45 days before the event or the election, in which state law trumps your local ordinance. So it's kind of a Wild West. You can put them in the right of way. You can really do whatever, I mean, to be quite honest. Before that time, it would have to fall into the local code, which restricts the height and the size of those depending if you're in a residential or commercial area. The time frame is pretty vague under our current code, which is why we went to a 30-day window for temporary signs. So that's the whole scope of how you would look at those right now.
Was there one sign per property? Is that what I had saw?
Yes.
On there?
Yes. Temporary signs are one sign proposed for 200 feet of frontage. So you could have more than one.
So,
based on the size of the property.
Our biggest fan can only put one sign in their yard. Okay, it's something to think about. corner lot sure could use more than one sign. So that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilman Emerson, to be followed by Councilmember Jensen.
Thank you, Mayor, Mr. Finder, and Mr. Hall. Yeah, I concur with whatever his name is, Lesser down there. Number 9. I appreciate how you've done this and all the effort you guys have put across. I did have one question, and me and Mr. Hall had met a week or so ago and went over all this. There's something in there that I kind of found curious, and I don't know if you had a chance, Mr. Hall, to look into that or not, about any signs that affix to an operable vehicle are exempt from this. And I've seen in other cities, there will be some event of going out of, one of these stores that goes out of business for like 20 years. And they have all these cars going around with these big, frankly, obtrusive signs on them. And this seems like a curious exemption.
So I guess the response I would have is, we did look at it, we considered that. There are some things that are difficult to enforce and difficult to address. One piece of advice our consultant gave us early was, if you try to address every situation, you can kind of get bogged down. When we looked at our situation today and our conditions in the community, this was not identified as a major problem. It could be, and if it is, then we could always come back and look at it. That's where we stand today. Our Planning Commission didn't consider that, and we never made that recommendation, and we wanted to be able to tell the stakeholders clearly what was exempted, and so that's why that's in there. I think the point you make is a good one, but the short answer is, it wasn't identified as a major issue as we start putting together a sign code.
Thank you.
Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. So you and I had an excellent conversation about historical signs. My assumption is you'll have a list of those because obviously the Gage Center one, I'm assuming the Goodyear plant sign would be historical. Is a list going to be produced of those so that we can lock that in stone? I'm assuming that signs that are non-conforming after that probably won't be historical unless they get really old really fast.
I'll step in. We looked into that. Historical signs are an exception, but you have to get that approved as an exception by our Landmarks Commission. So unless people want to come forth with their own historical sign, another way of doing that is doing an inventory of the signs, much as you suggest, and we are currently in the middle of a mid-century modern inventory of buildings, which you can't, it's a small leap to get 2 signs from there. So when you see this again for approval, we're not going to have a list of historical signs yet. But the idea is that any sign that could be historic, we're not going to take any action on those yet, and we're going to be more proactive in coming up with a list through the Landmarks Commission as well.
So somebody can't just decide, oh, my sign is historic, and therefore it doesn't have to apply to these rules.
Right.
Excellent. So one last curveball to throw at you. And by the way, I think you guys have done an excellent job with this process. I really do. And I love the graphics that make this easy to understand. Somebody decides to put a sign on their building and then declare it a mural. Art. How does that work?
Okay, so that is what we call a painted exterior wall sign. And it's kind of an unusual sign. A lot of times you see them in old buildings downtown. When we looked at the downtown sign standards about 2 years ago, that came up, and we wanted to accommodate them. So painted exterior wall signs are accommodated under other types of on-premise signs. I can give you a page number if you like. It is, it'd be page 21 in the hard binder that we gave out, page 22 possibly in your packet, in your electronic packet. And they would be allowed in and controlled in some zoning districts, but not all. So there are some zoning districts where they just wouldn't be allowed. But say in most of the major commercial districts, mixed-use districts, and the downtown districts, they'd be permitted, and there'd be standards that apply to them.
Excellent. So somebody can't just, instead of putting up a regular sign, decide, well, we're just going to paint one on the side of the building and call it art.
That's correct.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks. Any chance you figured out the water tower question?
The water tower question is tricky. I think that potentially you could consider it a wall sign.
Okay.
It's on a structure. As a wall sign, it'd be restricted by the width of the structure, the width of the tower. There are some districts where it would be pretty restrictive. So if there's a water tower in a residential district, might not accommodate that type of signage very well.
Okay.
But in a commercial district, it would probably accommodate it pretty easily.
So if we as the city wanted to paint a neighborhood on the water tower that's in that neighborhood, we might need an exemption.
If it was determined to be not advertising, again, you get into kind of a content neutrality issue.
Sure.
But under certain circumstances, it might not be considered a sign. But if it has copy on it and it's identifying something like that, it's probably a sign.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. Abandoned signs, I didn't know if there's any way we can charge for that, if we're gonna be taking them down. Bill, did we talk about that? What I see a lot of is, people lease this property, and then, they automatically put up their signs, whoever they lease it to, and then they leave, and then they leave their sign. So does that fall back on the landlord, or how could we?
Yeah, it does fall back on the property owner, landlord. Most multi-tenant business, even single-tenant properties, they do take the sign of the former business off, and they leave it blank. They don't want false advertising.
Well, we got a Habitat sign out there. I mean, that's an example.
Yeah.
At 29th and, and we have I get a lot of
Right.
calls, and they'll say, hey, the sign's here, where did they move to? I'm just saying.
That's right.
How can we prevent that? Has that been talked about?
Yeah, so there our new code would say you have 6 months to remove that sign. In that instance, take the Habitat sign, for instance. That'd be a 6 months, and if you don't, you either have to remove the sign or cover it.
You as in them?
As in the
Property
landlord.
owner, the leaser?
Yes. And the folks in the sign industry can tell you that happens. They do that a lot. In fact, they write that into their contracts with the people they work with. But there's some that fall through that don't get caught like that.
So basically, I need to tell because I'm gonna get these calls, so I need to tell them, you need to write that in your contract, that when they leave, they need to remove that sign.
That would be the best case, absolutely. That's pretty standard in the industry, but again, some of these.
Or it's coming back on the landlord.
Right.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And then another one is like faded signs or broken signs. I see a lot of that they're so old that they're
Yeah.
faded.
Yeah. Oh gosh, we went round and round on the White Lake sign for years. Not years, but maybe it seemed like years.
It was years.
It was years?
It was years.
Okay. Holes in the sign, for instance. We have others like that, but that comes to mind. Yeah, the owner, we reached out to the owner and said, you do need to maintain the sign. No holes, can't be peeling paint, frayed. Holes and peeling paint and hanging parts are easy to tell someone you need to fix. When does it become faded? That's a little more challenging, but that is actually in our current code, and we're going to keep that so we can use for unkept signs.
So when they see that, they can basically get wrote up for that, is what you're saying?
Yeah, Gage Center sign was written up. before it was fixed, it was, the paint was peeling off and just looked terrible. So eventually they got around to it, but that was because we got a complaint and acted on it.
Okay. And I know that, and you can probably get back to me if you need to, I know at one time we talked about all the flags that were in the front yard of a business. Is it now, does that address how many flags they can have? Or does it go all the way down? Mr. Henderson's got a lot in his property that's.
All right. The new code, yeah, technically our current code does not accommodate those. We've just, since we knew we were going to update, we've only been enforcing the number in some cases, again, only when we get complaints. But yeah, it is 1 per every 200 feet of frontage in the new code. So they won't be strong, they shouldn't be strung down the road. And then they're limited to, I think, 15 days at a time. So it's fairly, they're accommodated, but they're more limited than just a regular temporary sign.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. Bill, I'm pretty excited to see some of those abandoned signs come down, especially on South Topeka Boulevard, as that is one of the main gateways into the city. I have a question on yard signs. The duration, I believe you had down here is 30 days. Does that take into account real estate listings, or typically a 60-day listing? And I would assume that those would be classified as a yard sign.
Good question. It would not. It is, a real estate sign is actually, in our new code, would be an incidental sign. Incidental being kind of secondary to the primary use of the property. And it's, most of those are more durable, either with the wood post or heavy metal stakes. So we would classify it as an incidental. There is no time limit, correct?
Correct.
It's incidental signs could be an entry, exit or entry sign, a menu board, anything that's just not the primary identifier of that property.
If I may.
If I could just add, Bill, as long as it's a durable material.
Yeah.
So as long as it's a durable material.
Okay.
Again, it's back to time, place, and manner. So if it's a durable material, it's considered an incidental sign. If it's a flimsy, permanent, or temporary type of material, it'd be considered a temporary sign.
Okay. Oh, and one more question, just unrelated to real estate signs, but also on the temporary signs. Would this address the issue that we have with, people sticking signs in our roundabouts around town and things that advertise $100 mattresses and things like that?
Councilmember Mays, that currently is not permitted in our current code. So it just, yes, right-of-way is not a permissible location for signs now and in the new code.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. You guys have done a lot of work, and thank you so much for that. I do have a couple of questions this evening. One, and I don't know if you need to go back to it, but when you first started the presentation, it had the Home Depot sign. It's a pole sign. It's really high up in the air, and it had Home Depot, and then then there's somebody else, and then Dick's on it. The question I had then, maybe specifically about that one, but about the Wanamaker corridor in general. On the one hand, there's the visual appeal survey, what looks nice and what doesn't. The other hand, though, and you haven't talked about it much, is just the safety and the actual visibility. For instance, when I'm a Wanamaker, there's a lot of traffic. It's difficult to find anything, and I look up, it's helpful to me to look to see that Home Depot sign and know that I'm on the right block and get myself into the correct lane so that I can turn in and get there. So what happens to the Wanamaker corridor with this proposal?
What would happen is eventually over time, you would see fewer and fewer pole signs. As people replace their signs, they would be required to bring in monument, shorter signs. The Villa West, the Sherwood Crossings is a great example where they're taking out pole signs, putting in monument signs at a shorter height. And quite honestly, we have built-in exceptions. If you set it further back, you can grow that sign because you do need to read it from the street. So the closer it is to the street, more restrictive. That's our public right-of-way, our public corridor. As you set it back further and further, not only is it less scrutinized because it's not along the public corridor, but you need to read it. And if you can't read a sign and you're straining to read a sign, could be a safety issue. So,
well, that's why I asked, because a lot of those are just one-story flat buildings, so that I don't know, I haven't tried to figure out the proportions, but if the sign can't be big enough or tall enough to be read, and the way we've built up Wanamaker, there's often something in front and then something behind it. So you're not even going to necessarily see the building from the street. So.
Yeah, again, signs further back from the road will be allowed to be bigger. They need to be. But your visual, your view shed is not 55 feet in the air. It might be if you're a half a mile away. Okay. But when you're in that block, we want your eyes as a driver to stay lower to the ground and not be looking up here or straining to see something. So the sizes that have been proposed here, as our experts will tell you, are very reasonable, so that you won't have that problem trying to read the sign, as long as it's along the street there.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll try and walk it through. I had asked you all questions about the temporary signs before, and I would encourage my colleagues to think about it in terms of ones you've seen or events that you've been involved with. I wasn't sure that 30 days was enough time for your typical, whether it's your Lenten dinner at your church or your holiday vespers that are going to be at your church or whatever. The Mulvane Art Fair was an example. I think they put their stuff out 60 days out because it's a big event, and that way everybody knows it's coming and locks the date. And I really appreciate that the staff had the wisdom to include the sign industry. I think that's really helpful, but they're the people who are selling the professionally made signs to folks. And I wanted to I'm going to do the best that I can to engage people just to double check, because I don't want to limit the ability of our grassroots groups, I don't know, Girl Scout cookie season or whatever. And there is a difference sometimes. I know that the staff and I guess the commission didn't like the kind of the undefined event date, but because we don't want flu shot signs up for months and months, and we don't want one every 10 feet in front of the Walgreens or whatever. I get that. But I don't want us to cut out the event signs that our community groups have put up. And so just wanted to encourage people to think about it a little more, and the political signs as well. If we wanted to ask people to look at samples and comment, I was just trying to look on my phone to find this on the website. Is it posted, or is there something we can link to so people can look at it?
The sign code?
Yeah.
Proposed sign code. So all of this is on our on the city's website, on our planning and developments webpage.
I couldn't get departments to come up on my phone.
If you,
so maybe.
I could try. If you Google sign code update, Topeka, Kansas, my guess is it will pop up.
Okay.
But we have a whole page dedicated to all what you got in your binder, that visual kind of
That's what I thought.
summary.
I just couldn't get it to come up.
This agenda item as well.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman May? Oh, no. All right. Thank you so much for the discussion.
Thank you.
We appreciate the thoroughness in the report, and I really enjoyed having the one-on-one time and being able to go over it as well.
Sure.
At this point in time, we move on to the non-action item B.
B is discussion regarding the Dynamic Core Redevelopment District, a tax increment financing district TIF that would encompass the downtown area and North Topeka Arts District NODA.
Mayor, governing body, tonight, introducing this? Yeah, I'll just introduce it. Tonight, we're going to, again, go back and discuss again the Dynamic Core Redevelopment District. At this time, I'll turn it over to Deputy City Manager Gerber for some comments, and then also hear from the applicant.
Governing body, good evening. We are here again to talk about TIFs. I feel like every time I talk to you, it has to do with TIFs. But that's a good thing because we're doing a lot of those right now. And it's an exciting time to be here. There's a lot of momentum. You all know this. And one of the ideas that's been suggested as a way to capture and increase some of that momentum is to preemptively establish some districts across the city, which would allow for the applicant to get a jump start on the TIF process. Because as we know, it can be a lengthy process, can be up to 6 months in terms of public hearings, and just going through the process can be a little cumbersome. So anything to get that jump started, I think, is in all of our minds to make whatever we can do for our developers a more business-friendly environment. So again, one of the ideas that's come about is to preemptively establish these districts. The Greater Topeka Partnership, the Downtown Topeka Inc., has come forward with the idea of establishing a TIF district in the Dynamic Core. We talked about this, gosh, it's been about 2 months ago now, and we had quite a lengthy discussion about this district and what it might entail and not entail. At your place tonight is the Q&A that I put together the last time we did this. It is exactly the same Q&A that you got previously, with the exception of the very 2 questions at the beginning of the document. Those are new because those actually came up as a result of our discussion last time. One of those I know Curtis Sneathen would like to go through with you, so I think at this time, unless you have questions of me from the beginning, I'm just going to ask Curtis Sneathen from the partnership to come forward and walk you through some of his information.
Thank you, Deputy City Manager, Council. I'm Curtis Sneathen with the Greater Topeka Chamber of Commerce. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Vince Fry, who is the president of Downtown Topeka Inc. It is a pleasure to have this second and we hope final group discussion about the Dynamic Core Development District. I do want to thank the Deputy City Manager, Mr. Gerber, his team, City Attorney, their colleagues at Gilmore Bell. Over those ensuing 2 months, there has been a great deal of research to be done, questions to be answered, and they've been truly collaborative partners as we try to move this project forward. So I want to thank them for that. Just a reminder of why we're even here. Setting up this district is a way of tapping into what we believe is the considerable potential for growth and development in your downtown, based in large part on the market study that DTI commissioned a couple of months ago. You heard the last time we were up here about some of the potential for new residential units, new office space, a number of other exciting possibilities. The goal with this district is to take a few of the first steps that are required under the TIF process and make it that much more convenient for developers to come and do some of the things that we saw in that study. Setting up the district establishes a baseline for the property values in the district. And let's keep in mind throughout our entire discussion that that's primarily what setting up the district does. It establishes the boundary and sets the baseline. Your real role in scrutinizing the particulars as this thing goes forward comes about as particular deals are brought to you by developers. They will first enter a process where they negotiate their project plans with the city. Those will be brought to you, and there will be, those are the opportunities, the best opportunities to manage this development process going forward and oversee how it goes. But our real goal is to, as we've said many times, basically put an open for business sign on downtown Topeka. Now, it's been a great discussion. It has been 2 months, but as you all know, it hasn't been a silent 2 months. We've been talking quite a bit and trying to embrace the questions that have been raised. And I am aware of, I think it's boiled down to 2 basic subject areas, and if there's more than that, we can we can talk it through. The first one has to do with this idea of the special fund that gets created when the TIF district is set up. We know that according to state statute, when the district is established, as of the next tax collection date, the city is required by state statute to collect any incremental increase in the property taxes and hold those off in a special fund. Ordinarily, when a developer comes to you at the same time they have a project, that doesn't really cause any questions to arise, because it's a given that the parcel that they're going to be developing is you know, the one where the property values will go up, and that question doesn't ordinarily arise. But because of the way we're approaching this, and we think it's the right approach, let's establish this area and watch as the projects and developers come to us. It has raised the question. Well, there will be, in the probably early months at most, we think, a period of time before development has had a chance to get going, before they've had a chance to negotiate with City Hall and get your approval. Probably property values in downtown Topeka are going to inch up a little bit. So there will be a little bit of an increment in the early going of this thing. Quick analysis by city staff indicated that the magnitude of that is somewhere in the range of $150,000, $200,000 or something along those lines, but there will be some money there. I know when we first sort of learned about this together, the last time we were together, some of us were a little bit taken aback, but I do want to remind you that that money is merely earmarked for use in the district. It's not as though it's money that is lost somehow. It doesn't go away. It just needs to be used according to law. It needs to be used in the downtown district. So let's keep that in mind. The other thing that we would propose to try to address that concern, in conversation, some of you have noted that there are portions of the district that we propose that are primarily residential. And the likelihood of commercial development in some of those areas seems pretty low at this point. And so as a result of those conversations, we would submit that we are happy to suggest a modification in the boundary of our district that removes some of those residences. In particular, the corner there at 17th and Topeka, if one moves northeast from there up to about 15th Street or so, most of those are residences that at this point in time it seems to be not a good fit to encapsulate those in a TIF district. So we are going to be proposing as we move forward to carve out that corner of the district. That seems to make sense, and that's a good outcome of some of our discussions. The final thing I would note is that, again, thanks to bond counsel and the work that we've done with city staff, and you'll want to confirm this with your own experts, but while the law requires that special fund to be created, and that is the idea, those funds are meant to be put aside so that they can be used to reimburse developers eligible negotiated expenses. Those monies don't have to be considered locked away for eternity. There is a process. If we get into the future and somehow the monies in that special fund comes to strike you as being out of whack somehow, or if there hasn't been sufficient development, there is a process for you to vote to have that money pushed back up out of that special fund. It goes back to the county, and it actually gets redistributed to the taxing authorities in the county, meaning the city and Washburn and the airport, et cetera. So that's not the idea, okay? But I thought you'd want to know that this isn't a lockbox that is forever frozen shut. There's a way to deal with it if this doesn't play out the way we think it will. We regard that as an unlikely scenario because we are quite confident that we're going to see good things happening in this district. Now, let's talk very briefly about the other issue that's been raised, and it's an important one, the interface between tax increment financing and the Neighborhood Revitalization Act. You know that pretty much all of the area that we've been talking about here is also covered by the NRP, if I may. And we have learned, as we've researched this, that in fact the same parcel of land cannot legally be subject to a TIF district and the Neighborhood Revitalization Act. At first, that seemed like an exotic kind of truth, but the more we unraveled it, the more we realized it just makes sense. Both of those programs are premised on rewarding the owner of the property for doing something that raises the value of the property by giving them back a little bit of the tax dollars that they raise. Well, you can't give back the same tax dollar twice. So those programs can't be layered. They don't work together at the same time. Well, that gave us pause. I mean, why would we want to come in and lay in a TIF district and thereby exclude the applicability of the Neighborhood Revitalization Act in certain areas where it might really be a useful tool? We've followed up on that concern. We've spent some time with Tom Underwood up in Noto. We've chatted with some of the merchants up there. In all likelihood, I think it's fair to consider the Neighborhood Revitalization Program a better tool for some of the smaller businesses that are, say, up in Noto. The likelihood that a TIF project will make sense to one of the merchants in Noto anytime soon seems low, but the NRP might be a good tool right now. Therefore, tonight, with Mr. Underwood's blessing and some of the other folks in his organization, we would propose to remove Noto from the district we're trying to create. That's been a delicate and a delicate conversation because we don't want to in any way communicate to our neighbors north of the river that we're trying to exclude them from the benefits of development. That has nothing to do with it. And I can assure you that in the future, if a developer comes along with a good eligible project to pursue in Noto, they'll have a friend in Vince and I and the others at the partnership as they try to pursue that. That's not the point. The point is that we realize that imposing a TIF up there would actually potentially hold back progress rather than promote it up there. It's also true that in the downtown part of the district we're proposing to you, we've counted 59 parcels, 59 property owners out of the 1,600 or so that are in this thing who are taking advantage of the Neighborhood Revitalization Program. We don't want to harm them either. There's no objective here to harm anybody. We therefore are happy to list those parcels as being excluded from the District 2. Now, ultimately, those tax rebates will pay out, and it may make sense to try to bring those parcels back into the district, and we can have that discussion at that time. But what I'm trying to communicate to you is that we would like to propose to modify our district in order to accommodate the Neighborhood Revitalization Program where it's effective, so that we don't have an unintended consequence there. So, like I say, there's been a lot of discussion, a number of questions, but as best I can tell, they somewhat boil down to that. And we hope that by proposing to adjust the district as suggested, I sent that over. Is that projectable? Or is that in the council members' packets? Okay, so I think maybe the changes I've discussed are before you, maybe. We are hopeful that you'll agree with us that the good things we're trying to foment with this district are desirable for our community, and that we've addressed the concerns that have been raised, and that you will recall that your best opportunity to play into this process will be when, as deals are brought to you and you're able to discuss the nuts and bolts of particular projects. With that said, we are hopeful that you'll see fit to put this on next week's agenda to vote to set up a public meeting next month, and let's move this thing forward. So happy to answer any questions.
Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You answered a bunch of my questions. In doing so, of course, obviously it raises some other ones.
Darn it.
First question I have is, you addressed the question of properties that are already receiving the benefit, et cetera, et cetera. What about a property that someone is going to purchase, and let's say we establish this district next meeting, then someone goes and buys just one building that's in the district. Do they then have the same opportunity to exempt themselves the same way as the ones that are already in the middle of the process. You following me?
I think I'm following you, and I guess that on the one hand, what I would say is that the applicant here, which I'm sort of speaking for Vince as DTI, but there wouldn't be any objection if it's brought to our attention before the thing is established that there are deals in flight and somebody's counting on, the NRP as part of the deal they're closing. I don't think we'd have any problem adding to that list of excluded parcels, again, in the hopes of not harming anybody. Once the thing is established, the idea is that those properties are now covered by the TIF district. Now, what I will tell you is that we've researched this as well, and I want to be clear that the idea is that properties don't come in and out of TIF districts in any sort of fluid way, but it is technically possible to pull a parcel out of a TIF district. You have that ability. It's administratively pretty ugly, and it would involve some math to try to figure out how to extract one parcel out of a TIF district, but that can be done.
I think that's probably the only concern I have at this point after this conversation, because the paperwork that we've even been provided in here talks about this as used for larger development. There's other tools that are used, I think is the actual wordage that's in here, for small businesses, one of which is one that we're talking about now getting rid of. So that begs the next question of for instance, obviously in looking at this project, the Cyrus wouldn't be included in a et cetera, et cetera. But if there was an individual person who, did a project like the Pennant or the Brass Rail, did those standalone-ish, would those be included under this? Would those qualify for TIF's funds? The renovation of those type of buildings, would those? The Cyrus obviously was a new demolition, boom, build a new building, but renovation under the TIF, was trying to read through here, and then my knowledge of it, acquisition costs, sewer costs, all this, I understand that stuff, but what about just where the renovations of an existing structure, where would we be there?
Well, the deputy city manager probably has the statute in front of him. One thing I would grab quickly, though, is it's tempting and fairly easy to cast this as TIF is for big projects and the other things are for small projects. I do want to be clear that the TIF is not on its face restricted to bigger projects. It's just that the sorts of costs that are eligible for reimbursement would only tend to come into play if you were, needing a new parking garage or whatever. So it's not necessarily big versus small, but your question is well put. Now, I don't have the list.
I was actually going through the information that you guys provided me in your deal. That's where it said that.
Oh. Okay.
Oh, you didn't realize it at first.
Mr. Gerber. If I could provide a little color to that, too. The short answer to your question, Councilman Lesser, is yes. There would be some costs that would be reimbursable through a TIF. But, for example, you give the example of the Cyrus. Those vertical costs would not be, which is why, in fact, that they have a CID. Right. Not the only reason, of course, but that's a reason. But there would be some, they had some utility relocation work that was necessary, some site prep work, those sorts of things, some project financing. So it's hard to draw a bright line in the sand and say yes or no, but in general, some of them would be, some of those costs.
Well, and that's where I generally want to just make sure that I understand, because I want to be careful of while establishing a TIF policy that can work great in certain aspects. I want to be careful not that it doesn't then eliminate, the smaller guys who want to go downtown and buy their business, redo their buildings, all those type of things where it is cost prohibitive at $5,000 unless that $5,000 application fee and $30,000 deal is, you guys took care of that, and then so now it's just do they qualify under that same one? Because we're taking away one tool to give another tool, and we better be pretty damn sure that we're going to get big development that's going to go in there and qualify for the type of projects that they want to do. Otherwise, the guys who are thinking about doing their renovations and all those type of things, we're eliminating them, because if we can't pull them out, that's the best of both worlds. The best of both worlds I see is approving this TIF project with the understanding of, if we have a small guy who wants to go down there, I mean, let's just say, for instance, the Wolf building is for sale. You know, if you just got one guy who wants to go down there, the question remounts whether or not that's going to be, as a renovation, a TIF is going to be, I guess I'm asking as well, I mean, wouldn't the credits be, wouldn't the other program, I'm forgetting the acronym here, but the neighborhood revitalization, couldn't that possibly actually be more lucrative to them than a TIF if they're just doing that one building?
Councilman Lesser, we tell people all the time, I'm going to give you one of my standard generic answers, but we tell people all the time it's a math problem for them.
Sure.
In the example you're proposing, I think that's likely the case, that the NRP could be more valuable indeed.
And that's my only concern, is making sure that, hey, let's do this TIF, that's fine, but as long as we have the ability then to pull something like that piece out, no different than we're doing. Otherwise, we can kind of be prohibiting ourselves from growth.
So as Mr. Sneathen noted, we have that ability. It's practically possible, particularly and it remains an administrative function, provided that it's a de minimis change to the district. Now, as Curtis and I just literally this afternoon talked about, not sure where the line between de minimis and de maximis is, if that's even a thing. But, there becomes that issue, A, and B, the secondary issue is if you have another TIF project somewhere in the district that has somehow been counting on that entire increment from the district, and you pull, parcel here, parcel there, pretty soon that increment changes.
Sure.
So.
I get that. It's just being mindful of what's got us to this point right now has not been huge developments. It's been people taking advantage of those and being at least understanding the risk as well as the rewards.
I appreciate your concern. We share that concern, and that's part of the reason this gave us pause, and we, have moved to exclude the existing ones. I think Vince will tell you that in his role as president of DTI, he's literally hasn't heard from anyone who at this point is looking to take advantage of the NRP program. So we're hopeful that won't be an issue that is widespread and acute, and that the upside of the development that this causes will outweigh that.
Sure. Thank you.
City Manager.
One thing that I would say related to that is if you look at the market study that was done related to downtown, they described a lot of uses that would be considered and opportunities that are being considered for downtown. The hard part is not knowing exactly where a person would want to do the development. Their study showed potential locations for different things to happen, but it's really hard to know exactly where they're going to be located. So by covering this larger area, it allows a developer to choose the location where they would like to go. But I think the key is by being able to have the ability to pull a parcel out, it does sets us up for the best case scenario for in both situations. Being able to allow that developer to choose the location where they want to do a large development rather than pigeonholing them into a certain area, and having it already completed will make the process move faster. But then being able to pull a parcel out and do a small business development through the use of the NRP is, I think, the right answer for this type of area.
Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of comments I'll throw in here. I think one advantage we have is that the vast majority of properties in the downtown area that are going to change hands already have. Most of the ownership is sort of settled after the initial, I hate to call it a land rush, if you will, but after the initial, announcement of reinvigorating our downtown core. I think most of those properties are pretty much where they're going to be for the foreseeable future. So our timing for this is actually, in my opinion, pretty good. There is a mechanism if something changes here and there to make adjustments, but for the most part, I believe we've got what's going to be there in place now. We've learned a lot about how we're going to use downtown as an entertainment venue, I think, in the last couple of years. If you look at what DTI has done with the Downtown Concert Series and where we position food trucks and how we do street closures and that sort of thing, there are some changes that need to be made in the way we initially laid out downtown and now how we're using it. A great example is when we had the Gary Woodland tribute. It was very difficult for people to hear the speakers because we had food trucks down there running generators. The initial revenue that's captured in this district could be very easily used to build up the electrical infrastructure there to allow them to plug in and buy power directly from Westar as opposed to run generators. Imagine how much better that event would be if we had the infrastructure in place to do something like that. So, I think in the interim, while, we put this in place and start capturing some of that revenue, that could very easily go back into needed improvements in that district now, and we, obviously have to double check that they all qualify, but there's some sidewalk maintenance that needs to happen there. There's some expansions that need to happen in a few places. So this revenue could go back into the district immediately to improve it, while some of these larger projects begin the process of coming online. So I'm absolutely in favor of this and think it's a good idea to move forward.
Councilwoman Hiller?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate everybody's work on this, and I did not talk to Mike beforehand about this. I share those concerns. As I think through the wonderful work that's been done, the Gizmo building, the Claytons were the first, and then later the Claytons built an infill building that's just wonderful. Bajillion down at First in Kansas, the Lofts down at First in Kansas, the Pennant, Iron Rail, each of those are one-off buildings who were able to just go down, file something when they got their building permit and get the NRP, and layer other as appropriate historic preservation credits, the downtown investment credit. It was easy. A little bit of a wait on the downtown grants, but other than that, to get an NRP, you just walk in and do it. One of the things that Curtis didn't mention that was going to make this idea easy was that rather than what we're used to in a TIF application is that this first step that's kind of described on the third page of this handout, the application fee of $5,000 to create the district. My understanding is the idea is to kind of say we're development friendly, that we could help people skip that step by creating this district. But it turns out that because our council ahead of us in 1991 declared this whole area an enterprise zone, or EZ, the regulations allow us to just pull that over so that the blight study doesn't have to be done. Which would mean then, if that can be done on a project by project basis, instead of having to create this whole district, then we could already promote that we could save people that first step, because they don't have to do the blight study. We could choose to offer it out in that way. At which point, for that second phase where people have to do the project and put up the $30,000 and do the legal fees and spend all that time, they would have to do that anyway, whether we'd created this big master district or not. So as I've tried to think it through, it seems that leaving it the way it is, but promoting that we can skip the step one for somebody who does want to do a big project might be simpler and accomplish the same. A couple other downsides that I think of, and again, overall I want to see the development happen, and so at first I'm like, sure. But there are 840 residential properties. Now that may be including NOTO at this point, so that would change, but that's properties, not units. we want to make sure, as Mike was pointing out, that we don't run off the small businesses or the people who own residential property in that district now by making them ineligible for the NRP. It's about the only thing they've got that encourages the improvement or actually enhancing the size of a building right now. We don't know how the riverfront's going to develop, but if it develops to some extent one building at a time, like downtown did, the NRP may be the most appropriate there. We don't know. I certainly want us to be able to do TIFs whenever it's appropriate. But typically, as you said, or maybe Mike did, that's a really big scale project. We're going to want some of those. But I don't want to put everybody else out of the market. We're just at that tipping point now where we had hoped to be, where there's enough development and the buildings have changed hands and we want them to move. If the projects that we're aware of right now would not be TIF projects because TIF is as involved as it is, then we just need to think about that.
Again, I appreciate this concern, and as I noted to you earlier today, I respect your thinking. I have a lot of admiration for how you're laying it out. We've tried to, meet in the middle there to some degree. Now, the one thing I'd like to, if I may, we're talking about this process as step 1, step 2, and we're trying to get to step 3. I think it's important to keep in mind that the existence of that old enterprise zone really only helps us because it's written into the state statute as a way of saying if you do a TIF district in an enterprise zone, you don't have to go buy a blight study or, frankly, go through the embarrassment of saying your downtown is blighted, okay? The state statute enables us to skip over that, okay? But there's more to establishing the district right now than just that. For one thing, the key to making this an incentive that is useful later and that gives you all plenty of room to negotiate is setting the base values now. Under the scenario you just described, as projects and developers come along, they'll be dealing with whatever the values of the property are at that point. And we will have kind of foregone the advantage of locking this thing in right now. It doesn't mean you're in some future time giving away the whole increment every time. That's not the point at all. That's what gets negotiated. But if we just do it on a project by project basis, I guess we feel like we miss the advantage of saying this whole downtown is open for you. The other thing I would note is that again, that enterprise zone informs the early establishment of the district, but even later, the project developer would still have those early hoops to jump through in terms of holding a public hearing and going through all of those other steps. So I don't want to overstate the convenience that old enterprise zone presents. Really, all it does is tell us, draw this thing within the enterprise zone, and you don't have to get a blight study, okay? That's...
Point well taken, and I appreciate that. Backing up, though, and again, this is just me going point, counterpoint. If we want to put our hand out and say we're being developer friendly, if we say we'll expedite that process for you because we've already got half the work done, that's a great message to give. One of the other things we've talked about along the way is that once we set this zone up, according to Doug, that we can't, for instance, say we want to do this master zone for 10 years or 20 years as an incentive to get things really going and then have it sunset. Because if there is a project open, and those are typically 20, 22-year projects, is that right?
Madam Mayor, Councilwoman Hiller, the TIF statute allows reimbursement expenses for a period of up to 20 years.
Okay.
And so, as we've talked, the reason you wouldn't want to shortchange that is when developers come to us, every single one of them says, I'm going to amortize this and expect these payments over 20 years. And if you short-shifted that, then It wouldn't work.
And the idea would, of course, this is me thinking about it, would be not to cut off any open project, but to say, you know, at a certain point, because that, when we set the baseline down here and it's growing and growing and growing, that's going to be a huge differential. And so, and maybe if Wichita apparently has stopped doing TIFs because they got to the point where they felt like they didn't need to offer that incentive anymore. And so if we wanted to be able to stop doing that incentive at some point, we'd be in a catch-22 about not being able to do it, because if we had open projects, we couldn't close the district down. And Curtis and I talked about it a little bit today, and he said, well, you could just stop doing deals and wait 20 years. But if that's the only way to end the program, it's just how would people in the future know that, or would they feel just caught? And
Well, I
sure.
appreciate that. We had a good chat about that. I guess that doesn't strike me as a problematic way to do it. We'll get out into the future, and let's just say there are 13 projects still pending, 25 projects still pending, and they've got some time left on their amortization. But you all as a body, and frankly it won't be you, right? It'll be a future generation of elected leaders who are... Sylvia, a future generation, may well decide. They might decide that the time for this has played itself out. And it will be within your purview to, I don't know exactly how you do it technically, through a resolution or whatever you would do, to instruct city staff to stop entertaining project proposals. You would pull off that open for business sign. And whether the district exists at that point or not is not the point. The point is that you're just communicating to developers, that's not what we do in Topeka anymore, if you wanted to do that. So.
But if partly what you wanted to do was reset the baseline because the values had grown so much and the differential was so huge, you wouldn't be able to restart at another level. It just complicated it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. I had a quick comment on the discussion we were having about the neighborhood revitalization program, and it led me to think that, you know, the whole purpose of the neighborhood revitalization program is to revitalize a neighborhood. This is going to revitalize the neighborhood, I hope, on a much larger scale than what the neighborhood revitalization program could do. And we have, most neighborhoods in Topeka are not eligible for those funds. This one happens to be. And I think it's important to note that if we do this, there's a good chance that that's no longer eligible for NRP anyways. And at some point, if we keep it as is, perhaps it gets to that point. But it's been a neighborhood revitalization program for a long time, and it's not worked its way out of that yet. I mean, it may be time to do something more. And there's investors out there that are looking for opportunities, and I think this is a way for us to show that there's opportunities in Topeka. There are opportunities in Topeka. So that's all I've got to say.
Okay. Well, this has been a robust, very needed discussion. Vince?
I gotta get up here just real quick. I just wanted to mention that in addition to this market study, the city, under the leadership of Bill Fyander, are working on a master plan for this area. So not only do we know what the market study suggests, but now we're going to have a plan that says this is where we want this to be and that to be, and give developers an idea of what we want and where it should go. We also had a conversation this morning about Kansas Avenue looks great, but when you turn the corner on the side streets or in the 1200 block, crumbling sidewalks. As Councilman Jensen said, this money can be used to fix those right now, and that money has to come from someplace. So he does a great job, but I just thought I'd get up here to put my 2 cents in.
Prince of Downtown.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the discussion, and just as we close this item, it's interesting to see that Richard Harmon, before he left the council, admonished our body to make sure that we started looking at areas that we wanted to see develop and start telling people, this is what we want, this is where we want it, and this is what we're going to give you if you come and do it. And this is exactly the discussion that we're having today. So with that, there are no more items. We're moving on to public comment. The first person that I will call is Mr. Chris Dester. Oh, so, I'm so sorry.
Well, it's kind of down and out because we passed the subject there.
Yeah, well, yeah. Just don't bang your gavel.
Council people, and Chris Deister is my name. I'm recently retired dentist. Spent from 79 to 97 here in a dental practice, establishing different things like we were one of the founding members, founders of the Topeka Latin School. Then when my son started getting college basketball scholarships out of town, we left in 97, stayed in Dayton, Ohio for 20 years, practiced there, and then retired last year and back in the city. But what I wanted to do is just kind of be a citizen who congratulated Bill Fyander on the great work he's done and his staff in just this whole signage area, because as I come back to Topeka, I want to be a force for good here in whatever way I can. So I'm on this Greater Topeka Partnership and committees there, and got a little project going on Highcrest now and stuff. But my real desire, my sole desire is I've worked in aesthetic dentistry all my life, cosmetic dentistry. That was my thing. I would have been an architect if I hadn't have done this, and that is Topeka has an incredible opportunity now as I've come back after 20 years and seeing finally all these groups, these do-gooding groups in Topeka getting together under this umbrella of Greater Topeka Partnership, kind of coming together and trying to get some stuff done in a coordinated fashion. So I appreciate them all. But Bill Finder kind of refereed these public meetings on signage, and I had some definite thoughts about that. Because I'm not really a business owner anymore, but when I look at these signs in the sky and these things going up in the sky, I'm thinking what we want here for Kansas Avenue as the core and outward is to be a destination. And we're not going to handle that unless we do above average things, shock and awe things like the Cyrus Hotel. And so I've got a few ideas that I've been sharing with Vince and Matt Pavarnik about moving ahead with those. But in these discussions with the signage, this all has to do with the aesthetics of the city, and it's extremely important to me to see this city I love that I'm coming back to now that I'm retired and I have time to snoop around and take some classes in public administration over at the school, Washburn and stuff, and try to be of some use here. I really want to give back to the city in any way I can, and so I'm just a citizen who's poking his nose into things and trying to put my feet on the ground here. So in this signage issue, my big thing in the public debates and discussions that Bill Finder kind of refereed was that everything we can get out of the sky, we need to. Everything. And if we have this future avenue, 12th Street, Huntoon, this could be Huntoon Boulevard in the future and be a beautiful affair. I grew up in Kansas City. I traveled the Ward Parkway for 18 years of my life.
You still have a minute. Mm-hmm.
One more. So I just wanted to encourage that there was a lot of compromises on how I felt about the signage situation ought to be, like no pole signs, whatever, anyway, and all of them taken down. That's what I would have preferred. But we got to the monument signs, and I just wanted to mention in the future, in 10 years, we already don't have any need for pole signs at all, to tell you the truth. We got GPSs. It's much safer looking at a GPS than trying to search out signs, Ms. Heller, because there's no need for these signs anymore. We got to think in the future, 10 years ahead, and we've done as well as we can. And I really appreciate what's been done. I think the compromises have been great, But when we think of being a destination, we need to think way ahead of cities like Wichita, way ahead. And so that's what I wanted to encourage, and just this thought about GPSs being, there are signs, they'll tell us where to turn, and it's much safer than looking up at signs. So let's get out everything, including the telephone signs, the telephone poles and all these electric lines going downtown.
You have to wrap up your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. I allowed Mr. Dester to speak because he actually was signed up for an earlier comment. Following our agenda, we are going to go into announcements. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. My announcement tonight is to remind you that Clean Slate Day is coming up September 20th. Flyers will be available later at the end of the week. Electronic copies will be sent out to the City Council. We are still looking for volunteers, so if anyone is interested in helping out that day, please let us know. It's a great day, an opportunity for us, so that's all I have.
City Clerk.
On the August 20th agenda, we have 3 presentations. We have the Finance Quarterly Report, Planning and Development Quarterly Report, and then we will have an update from Momentum 2022. Consent agenda is a noise exception resolution. Action items include an ordinance and resolution for the Combined Utility Revenue Bond Series 2019A. We have an ordinance from Blue Cross and Blue Shield for extending their parking lot on 1104 Southwest Polk. We have a joint memorandum agreement for group health care from 2020 to 2022 for cost sharing with the labor unions. And then we have a resolution proposing to cancel the October 1, 2019 governing body meeting to facilitate travel to the inner-city visit in Montgomery, Alabama.
All right. I'm excited to see everybody. It was kind of weird not to see you for so many weeks. I actually missed you guys, so it's good to be back. I want to thank everybody that participated in National Night Out. It was a great Saturday. I got to visit a few NIAs. It was a really crazy day. Whoever has the community calendar, let's talk, because that day was National Night Out. I started seeing neighborhoods at 10 a.m. Then we had at the Greater Topeka Partnership, there was a training for a speakers bureau that's going to be coming up with Momentum 2022, and we had a panel talking about the East Topeka Learning Center, Washburn Tech East, and how a whole community came together to make that happen and how exciting that was. Then after that was a 2030 gala. Cruising the Capitol.
It was just cruising on the Capitol. I mean, there was a lot going on in Topeka. So if you're bored, that's on you. The other thing that I want to say is primary season is over. There's going to be a lot of 30-day signs hanging out in the city of Topeka with names of people. So just anybody that's looking, listening to this, remember to be active. It's important for you to be civically active. And at the age of 18, you have the responsibility, not just the right, to vote and get involved civically. I want to say thank you to my phenomenal interns. This year, the mayor's office had the privilege of having 3 interns that were spectacular. Kira Beatty, who is a student at Colgate University, was here. She was helping us do an analysis on the diversity of our boards. We had Ian Trapp, who single-handedly helped us coordinate the first census committee meeting. And he is one of our quarterbacks for the football team at Washburn. So go Ichabods, and I will be there embarrassing him the first game that he's here in town. And then we have Rodrigo Dorador, who came to us from Harvard. And Rodrigo has wowed all of us with his presentation and his training of individuals in a speakers bureau on how do we share the stories of what make Momentum 2022 so impactful for our community. Not our speak, because we all have our technical speak that we use, but by sharing stories. The last thing, 2 more things, sorry. It's, man, we passed the budget unanimously. And that is something that did not happen before.
I like to reconsider my vote.
No, you're not. But this is something that did not happen before. So to our team in the budget department, and to Jessica, thank you. Thank you for working with all of us, to spending time with all of us, for making the budget so open. In the newsletter that I send every month, I have made it a point of talking about the budget. So for those of you who get it, We're trying to get you involved. And this is your budget. It's not our budget, it's your budget. And we will put in the budget what you let us know that is important to you. So if you want to see things in the budget, talk to us throughout the year so that we are able to accommodate the budget to the desires of our community. It's important. It's your budget. And finally, I want to say thank you to our community for stepping up in such a big way. It has been very obvious that from the beginning, we have been working with the rescue mission. And I mean, everything from, we have 2 committees that are looking at ordinances. One of them is a camping ordinance that the rescue mission is involved in. The other one is the panhandling, the street safety ordinance that we have that we've been talking about. We've been talking about how do we support the individuals that are impoverished and that don't have a place to stay in our community. And those are conversations that we've been having in this body for a long time in partnership with the rescue mission. Once we found out that the rescue mission was in trouble, we were right there. What was even more beautiful is the fact that a lot of people stood up and they have been right there with the rescue mission. Just today, I just put a little bracelet, a friendship bracelet that was made by the daughter of Kelly Baker, who is a city manager's assistant, and she is selling those. And I think that she doesn't want me to tell the number, but I think that Penny has raised close to $400. This is a child that's in elementary school. And on one side, it talks about the rescue mission and the statement that Barry Feeker made about the 3-strand cord is hard to break. And they put that statement on one side, and then in the back, she just signed it to me. And she's been selling these. And this is the type of stuff that we're hearing everywhere in our community. $180,000 is a lot of money. I have been asking Barry Feeker a lot of hard questions with regards to, are we sure that there was anything else that we could do? There's people asking really challenging questions. There's no embezzlement happening. That's what we've been all reported. The financials were shared with the council because it was requested. There was no if, ands, or buts about it. It was like, we want the financials, here you go. Our community is stepping up, and I think that it's important that we continue to do so. $180,000 every month are needed. And we don't have to make that in $100,000 gifts. I think that the magic that the mission has always had is that they don't depend on government funding. The government is not going to be the savior. This is a community organization where everybody gives $1, $2, $10, whatever they can give. And that's what makes the mission special. It's not the rescue mission, it's our rescue mission, where our citizens that have the least are getting the most love. So thank you for supporting, and please continue to do so. Councilman Jensen.
So every time around this, or every year around this time, I start harping on people about the animals they have that are outdoors. Folks, it's nearly 100% humidity. We're swimming around. Your pets are also stuck in that same situation. So if you leave them outside, please make sure they have shade and water. They don't have the ability to get into air conditioning on their own unless they have opposable thumbs and are monkeys in the zoo, and then we'd have to ask Brendan about that. But I want to commend everybody that was part of the concert series in downtown. The rock concert was fantastic. I lost count of the number of people down there, but it was an amazing event, and again, this year it went off without a hitch. So thank you, everybody. Have a nice week.
Councilman Mays, Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to tell everybody that the first location to open at Wheatfield Village is supposed to be Johnny's here in August, so be watching for the grand opening, and I'd like to invite you guys to come over to their ribbon cutting. Their neighbor, Spin Pizza, is also looking for employees, so that sign is out there too. So I encourage you to come over and check that out. Thanks.
Councilman Lesser, Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. Just touch on a couple things that were mentioned before. I had 9 stops on my neighborhood night out just in District 1, and it was awesome. And I hope everybody was able to get out on the council, but also in the community. I've got the advantage of getting to go from one to the other to the other. They're each unique. They each make a difference, and each and every one of them succeeded in doing the mission that Safe Streets has set out for that, in that there were people there who don't go to meetings or who aren't around very much, but do come and meet their neighbors and build community. Again, each one of them in different ways. So hats off to all 9 of mine that were having events, but also I think was the final number must have been more than 87 community-wide. That's awesome. And apartment complexes, as well as organized neighborhoods, as well as neighborhoods who just get together once a year for a picnic. So I thought it was a wonderful all-day event. I too wanted to comment about the rescue mission. I think it's amazing. I wanted to give a shout out to the county for raising the issue and kind of upping the conversation about it. We all do care about it, and it's helping, these conversations are helping us all to sort out just how we can help, both to celebrate the $400 that kids are raising, as well as, I mean, when I was talking to Barry the other day, and when he already had a $100,000 contribution in, I said, tell people, tell them. I think it's really wonderful. So I hope everyone will contribute in whatever ways that they can on a one-time or a monthly basis, because it is important. Thanks.
Deputy Mayor? Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say that school started today, but everybody goes back tomorrow. So I'm pretty happy about that. My little 7th graders will be on that bus at 7:03. Just watch out for the kids and slow down. We tend to forget that. I just want to thank Mr. Henderson for stepping up to the plate and giving to the mission, and I think that was a fine job that you did.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor, and you're welcome, Ms. Ortiz. I just, 2 things. First of all, a few people I wanted to thank tonight, and they left early. There's a couple here with their son, and that's Deanne and Ivan Gutsky, and their son Braxton. I assume he was here for a merit badge, but they are some of the prime advisors of the aviation post, Explorer Post 8 here in Topeka. And a couple weeks ago, they led a group of kids up to Oshkosh for the fly-in up there. And what's really cool is Topeka, for about the last 10 years now, Topeka's had the most kids go up there together. So it's a fantastic thing. The kids all week, they help guide aircraft out and guide, which is amazing. You have these $1 million, these P-51 Mustangs and these fighters and stuff, and our kids from Topeka are lining. Actually, it makes me a little nervous. I was afraid I was going to get a bill for one of them, but it went off without a hitch. But they do a great service, and I'll just plug it real quick. In a couple Saturdays, they have an open house there. If you're 14 through 16 or 17, I believe, you can go there. You can have a free flight, just see what it's all about. It's a very low-cost way to get your pilot's license, and they just had 4 kids from here get their pilot's license in the last few months. So, great organization over at Billard Airport. But National Night Out, it was fantastic, and I want to thank a couple people by name. Judy Wilson, who lives in Rolling Meadows neighborhood in my district. She's the organizer of that, and every year does a fantastic job, so thank you, Judy. Also, you saw Curtis Sneeden up here and all these hand motions he was making as he was giving us his presentation on the downtown TIF. I don't know who all knows this, but Curtis is actually a magician. And if you were at, any of the 10 or 12 I shouldn't say NIA's, National Night Out events, Curtis from about, it must have been from like noon till 8 o'clock that night, went from event to event to event, giving about a 30-minute magic show at each one. So he was fantastic, and you have to catch him if he's ever on stage anywhere. I also just wanted to also mention Officer Morgan Bracken, who is the community officer in my district. Morgan's just fantastic, but he also came to at least the ones that I was at. And here's a guy in his full uniform, in the body armor, got all of his stuff
Playing
around.
ping pong?
What's that?
Playing ping pong?
He was not playing ping pong, but maybe he did earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But I mean, it was 100 degrees out, and he was in his black uniform, so fantastic officer, and I want to thank him for that, as well as everyone, Rolling Meadows, Lakeshore, 34th Street, Highland Acres, and Central Highland Park. It was a fantastic night, so thank you to everyone who participated.
Councilman Padilla. I do have a complaint on National Night Out. City manager, I was stalked by the chief of fire. Every place that I showed up, he was there. Just kidding. We now move on to public comment. The first person is Mr. Sonny Scroggins.
I think the last time I was here, speaking on hoodies and don't shoot, I'm circulating a letter that's dated October the 5th, 2017. Hope I have enough, maybe not. I know it's late, so I'm gonna be brief. And thank you, Karen. It's a letter from Nathan Smith, who's a former Topeka City Council person. Give you a chance to read it and digest it, and just stand for any questions, comments, or concerns. I think Reverend Jensen, I think it's his name.
Reverend, we'll call him.
Or is it Reverend?
Brenda.
Brenda, Reverend Brenda. Appreciate your comments. And, you know, prayer is good. It's always good to take time to pray. So, but I think there's something addition that this council could do that would be very easy. You know, between at Cushenberry Park, between 15th and 17th, there's just one little short passage. There's no houses, no nothing. And you'll notice that, again, the letter was dated October the 5th, 2017, so that's 2 years ago, and at that time, we did visit with the people in the area, and they didn't have any problem with it. So give it your honest thoughts and see what you can do. I know it's not according to proper procedure, but sometimes, you know, for the good. And with all the struggling that we're going through, you know, we're many colors but one soul, so I'll just close out. I know everybody's tired. I am. I haven't been here in a long time. But anyway, are there any questions, comments, or concerns? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Councilwoman Heller.
Just so we connect some dots, Sonny had caught me out in the community and raised this issue, and I think we've connected you with planning, with the actual application forms that can be done for dedications or renaming, right?
Okay.
Okay. But Mr. Finder's sitting right behind you there. He can say hello before you go.
Mr. Fine is the one in the blue?
Yeah.
Okay. Then one other thing, since my time ain't expired, and I know it's late, but when are we going to desegregate Kansas Avenue and put a female down there? You know, we've written letters and talked to folks, but we really need to do that, Topeka. All right, thanks.
All right, next person signed up to speak is Gene Wheeler. Gene Wheeler. Next person is Mr. David Jackson, Dave Jackson.
I guess move this over. Good evening. I am Dave Jackson, and my wife Annette and I own and operate Jackson's Greenhouse and Garden Center at 1933 Lower Silver Lake Road. This is my 51st year in the business at that location. But I'm here tonight to express my real disappointment in the manner that the city engineering department has handled the road improvement on the Vale Avenue parcel, and I apologize to those that have already heard my complaint, but here it goes anyway. There are a bunch of reasons for my concern and disappointment. First, Although Vail was far from perfect, many streets in Topeka are in far worse condition. We didn't think it needed it. Second, at the public hearing held 2 years ago, there was no one in the room that expressed any real support for the project, the necessity of it, and questioned why it was even being considered or necessary. Third, if the road was to be reworked, then they should have considered it under a different program. It should have been improved, widened with improved drainage. Instead, of course, under the tax policy, the tax, street tax, sales tax initiative improvements, I understand, can't be made. They have to go back in, the road has to go back in the same way it was. So what they did was take the whole road out and put in a new base and put the same, they're putting the same road back as they were. They're putting the same intersection in that was there before. And this takes into no account, of course, all the semis that run up and down that street that from time to time during harvest block the street all the way from the south end of Vail clear to the north end of the Vail when the trucks are backed up at the elevator, so nobody can get by. So this part of it seemed unnecessary. Fourth, of course, the time that the city engineering has allowed from May the 13th to mid-September for a simple street improvement like that of 2 blocks is just ridiculous. And I begged them. They had to close it on May the 13th for this job to be done by harvest time. That's what they said. The fact of the matter, and when I requested them to make a change or see if the contractor could wait 2 weeks, the contractor, of course, said no, because there's a penalty on the end. So when you're doing streets, why don't we put an award in or an incentive to get the thing done? They worked 3 days between May the 13th and May the 31st, the contractors. It was due to rain, and I don't fault the contractors at all. Schmidt Line has been great to work with for us. But right now, the whole intersection is closed. The only way people can really legally get to me is from the east side. The signage, the detour signage has been worse than the worst thing I've ever seen. And it's just frustrating to me that you guys as a city council don't have enough input in this to improve the whole delivery of services in that engineering department. So far, this improvement has cost my business at least $25,000 in lost
Sir, do you need
income.
additional time?
It's late. I'm not going to take up any more time. I just want to point out that it's either the city council needs to be reformed so that there's something. You guys are great folks, but you're not able to get anything done or accomplished because everybody seems to think that it's okay what's going on. And, it's just not. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you for your comments.
Mm-hmm.
The next person signed up to speak is Will Pope.
Good evening. My name's Will Pope, and I want to thank you all for passing your budget tonight without increasing the mill levy. And there's been a lot of talk that we may need to increase the mill levy next year, and I think that would be the wrong way to go. We shouldn't grow government faster than we grow our local economy. That's a short-sighted and unsustainable approach. City tax revenue should naturally increase as more people move into our community and as property values naturally increase. It shouldn't increase because we're putting artificial increases into it. And I would point out that the budget for the city has increased quite a bit over the last few years, quite a bit more than inflation. So the problem is we haven't grown. You look at where our population was in the year 2000, that was the year Go Topeka was created. Year 2000, we were at 122,000 people. Had we grown at the national growth rate, we'd have gained 20,000 more people by now. If we had grown at the state growth rate, we would have gained 10,000 more people by now. But we have lagged behind both. We've grown by 3,500 people, and our population is only 900 more than it was in 1970. So economic growth is a big issue, and that is the one way that we should increase our tax base, not by increasing our mill levy. I do want to talk about Go Topeka for a little bit. I think we've been doing this experiment for 20 years, and it hasn't worked. And it's time to take a hard look at whether we need to go in another direction. You know, they were created to give out corporate incentives to businesses here in town with the thought that that would create jobs, stimulate our economy. A lot of research shows that that doesn't work, and it hasn't worked for Topeka. And yet we're putting $5 million a year into Go Topeka and not looking at it. I'd point out one incentive that was given out earlier in the year to Hill's Pet Food, up to $200,000 for the creation of a new facility and 6 new jobs. $200,000 for 6 new jobs. That's not a transformative economic development strategy. I think we need to go in a different direction. And Hill's Pet Food, they're owned by a $15 billion a year revenue company. They can afford to build their own building. Chances are they're not going to be building that anywhere else. They're headquartered here in Topeka. And I would also point out that their finance director is on the board of Go Topeka, which is the entity that suggested they be awarded that. I think we need to be more careful about where we're putting our tax money. I'm also concerned about the use of the TIF in the CID districts, which you talked about tonight. They create inequity in our local market. And so if you're in the district, that's great for your business. You're doing well. You've got an advantage. But if you're outside of it, your business is probably going to be hurt. And in fact, you saw that earlier this year when you guys created a CID district on Wanamaker at the old Kmart. And right after that, you had 2 businesses that decided that they were going to leave the mall to move into that new area. We didn't help our town out by doing that. What we did is we heard out a property owner across the street. We further emptied our mall. And now consumers are paying more sales tax to shop at those businesses. So we really need to look at, are we creating a fair market in Topeka? I do think we need to look at Go Topeka. JEDO does have the opportunity to give them 180 days notice and go in a different direction in economic development. And those funds can be used per the JEDO charter for infrastructure and to fight blight, which would improve our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person signed up to speak is Mr. Joseph Ledbetter.
We'll take you a different direction, and I will concur. Morgan is just a fantastic police officer for Highcrest, Morgan Bracken. I'm a member of the advisory for Parks and Rec, and Sylvia's laughing because she's to blame for this. She appointed me. So 3 years ago, I got on that council, and I tend to put a lot of energy into whatever I do. And I've been concerned from, especially the second year on, the lack of maintenance money being set aside in the budget for Parks and Rec. I looked back historically at 7 years of budgets, and I saw almost no maintenance money in that time frame where Parks and Rec had been consolidated with the county with the city. Okay, so I am going to be referring to this contract. This contract was dated August 3rd, 2011. The contact person is Councilman Archer, who's now Commissioner Archer. This was approved by both bodies. And in this contract of 9 pages, with also an attachment, which is an inventory, the first 9 pages, I'm going to read some of this to this body into the record. On page 2, paragraph D, effective January 1, 2012, the county shall become solely responsible for all maintenance and upkeep associated with the county's use, ownership, and maintenance of all the properties identified in attachment A, which I'll refer to also. Number E, a list of the properties that will be maintained and operated by the county is in attachment A. Now, attachment A is a number of pages, and this lists all of the parks and parcels that were transferred to Shawnee County, including, it also has their inventory, playground equipment, flower beds, any number of restrooms in some of these parks. So the concerns I've got as this has developed over the last 2 years, we've been getting some maintenance money where we were getting no maintenance money out of the commissioners. But we have a $14 million deferred maintenance backlog. And even tonight I was emailing the director of Shawnee County Parks and Rec. I said, could we, for crying out loud, get the pump fixed over in Gage Park where the pond has just turned green? Did the same thing last year. They did put a new pump on last year, but now they haven't done it this year. And, well, it's on a list. It's on a project list. I'm going, how long does it take to fix a pump? And it's not just a matter of the function. It's a matter of perception. These parks belong to we the people. And Country Club Park has almost no playground equipment. That's in District 3. I've been complaining about that. I've been complaining about, we have a park, Austin Park in Jeff Square, where they welded the doors shut to the restroom. I don't get it. I went over and actually had to see this myself. I took pictures of it. It's welded shut. There was no notice to the neighborhood. There's no notice to the county or to the city, and there's certainly no notice to the advisory board. The advisory board is specifically talked about on page 6 and 7. We are to be given all major proposals, any changes, propositions for construction, reconstruction. We were not noticed about anything going on at 21st and Urish that was not brought before our advisory council. Am I out of time?
You are,
Wow.
sir.
Could I have 2 minutes? If you feel like it.
We have a motion from Councilwoman Ortiz, a second by Councilman Emerson. We now proceed by voting.
We have 9 yes.
Thank you. I know it's late, so, but I had to bring this concern up and put it on the record because I've done it with the county. I've done it several times with the county. And we seem to have a concept that the advisory council is being bypassed, and we're going to have more discussion on that later in the month. But we perform an important role. We actually bridge the county and the city. We actually take the input from the public, and I get a lot of input from the public. I am known. I mean, people talk to me. They talk to me everywhere I go, and they tell me about things if they see I'm involved in them, and so I report these and bring them back. And I take very seriously the duties of our advisory council, and it was set up, negotiated by Councilman Archer as part of this agreement that we were to be involved, and there was a reason for that, because we bridge our appointments, the people that are appointed, we talk to them, they talk to us, they tell us what they want to see done. Now, we've accomplished a lot of things as an advisor in the last couple of years, but I'm concerned about this contract, and I have talked to some other attorneys, and we know that the 4 corners of the contract are important. What's in this contract is what's important, not what's outside of it. And we have to enforce this. The maintenance has to be done. These parks have to be maintained. The water fountains have to work. The playground equipment has to be upgraded, not just removed and nothing else comes in. They leave it, just grass to play with. What kid does that? None of it, I mean, a lot of it's just not making sense. We've got flower beds at 20th and Oakley that were removed. My son's been complaining about that. He says, I bought this house, we had flowers over here. Now the county's just removed them. There was no notice to the neighbors. The restroom in, I think I've said enough. Just be aware of the concern that a lot of the public's raising, and stay tuned, okay? And help us out, all right? Thank you.
Mr. Clark Trammell.
Well, we're going to close an evening together again. I have just a little list here, but to pick up where Joe left very quickly, if you recall the last council meeting, I passed out that contract to you all. So you've received that information that he was referring to between you and the county on parks. Relative to signs, Jeff, we have 45 days to put campaign signs out from the day of the general election passed, and you have 2 days after that to pick them up and take them back home. So on signage, I'd like to add my 2 cents worth. The one question I would have asked if I was sitting in your seat is, do we have the staff to enforce and service the codes for signage? We can have all the rules and regs we want, but if we don't have the staff to go out and say that's in non-compliance and that needs to be picked up, et cetera, then they hold no weight. So think about that. If we're going to pass laws and codes, we need to be able to enforce them and service them, or don't pass them, because it'll just frustrate you. Beyond that, relative to signs, I don't know, this is kind of funny. Nobody brought up the question about sandwich signs, so there's another sign where, is he out in the street waving at everybody with a sandwich sign or not? But that's a big project, and that's very important to our community, and I enjoyed the discussion you all had. A couple of things to remind you of. We talked about Parks and Rec, 12th Street, Narrowing. I can't wait till that comes up as a subject we can discuss as a community because it's still bothering everybody. TMTA, transportation makes this city work. And I know you all are sensitive to that, and I hope we continue to pay more attention and have more dialogue and input with TMTA as to what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it, and give them the support that they need to fund that budget to firm up and continue to expand our transportation as a tool and a resource. The other thing I wanted to bring forward are 2 very positive things. One is we have a couple of incredible events that are getting ready to take place. The National Travel Planners Conference is coming here. That is huge. I have been involved with that group in the past when I lived in Oklahoma to develop tourism in the state by using the travel planners, and then in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, when Phillips 66 was there. I hope you all in Go Topeka and the Greater Topeka Partnership create a plan to capture these folks and present our city and take advantage of this interaction because they can bring it to the table. This is big time for us. And the other one is this plug and play group out of California. How exciting is that? And let's look at that, in my opinion, if we want to have some vision, and look at that where we're going to place them. Put them out at the Northeast Training Center, and let's create the Northeast Midwest Economic Development Academy, where people from around the country come here to learn how to be entrepreneurs and build their business. These guys are going to bring it. Let's expand on their knowledge base and who they are and build our machine so it works for Kansas. It works for Topeka. Good stuff. Good job, guys. Have a nice evening.
Thank you for your comments. At this point in time, I'm looking at legal and being told that there is no executive session this evening. So therefore, I can actually go, this meeting is adjourned.